The carriage door slammed shut with a sound like a coffin lid. Cecilia Ashbourne pressed her gloved hands against the velvet seat, feeling the wheels lurch forward, carrying her toward a man she'd met twice and a life she hadn't chosen. 22 years old and already sold. Her father's debts had become her dowry, his shame her inheritance. Duke Adrian Blackmore had needed a wife of suitable breeding. Her family had needed his money. The transaction had been efficient, bloodless, complete. She'd seen his eyes during the ceremony, gray as winter fog and just as impenetrable. He'd spoken his vows like a magistrate reading charges. No warmth, no promise, just obligation dressed in ermine and gold. Now the estate loomed ahead through the rain, vast and silent as a mausoleum. This was not a marriage. This was erasure. But if you think I'm going to disappear quietly, Cecilia thought, watching the stone walls rise against the darkening sky, you don't know who you've married. Before we begin this journey together, because this is a story about survival, transformation, and the brutal cost of power, drop a comment below with your city. I want to see how far Cecilia's story travels across the world. And if you stay until the end, you'll witness something extraordinary, a woman who refused to be forgotten. Now, hit that like button and let's step into 1802 England, where our story truly begins. The servants had lined up in the entrance hall like soldiers awaiting inspection. Cecilia stepped from the carriage into a world of polished marble and cold formality. Rain dripped from the hem of her traveling cloak, forming small dark pools on the pristine floor. Somewhere in the back of the line, a young maid flinched. "Mrs. Holloway will show you to your chambers." The Duke's voice came from behind her, clipped and distant. "Dinner is at 8. Do not be late." She turned, but he was already walking away, his boots echoing through the cavernous space. Not a glance back, not a word of welcome. Just orders, delivered to the latest addition to his household inventory. The housekeeper, a stern woman with silver hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face, gestured toward the grand staircase. "This way, Your Grace." "Your Grace." The title felt like a crown made of ice. Cecilia followed, ascending stairs that seemed designed to dwarf anyone who climbed them. Portraits lined the walls, generations of Blackmores staring down with the same cold eyes, the same proud distance. Not one smiled, not one looked remotely human. "The Duke's chambers are in the East Wing," Mrs. Holloway said, her tone as flat as parchment. "Yours are in the West." Separate wings, separate lives. The architecture itself announced the terms of this arrangement. The room they'd given her was beautiful in the way a museum was beautiful, perfectly appointed, utterly lifeless. Silk wallpaper in pale blue. A canopied bed that could sleep four. Windows overlooking gardens so precisely manicured they looked drawn by compass and ruler. Everything in its place. Nothing touched by warmth. "Will you require assistance dressing for dinner, Your Grace?" Cecilia looked at her reflection in the mirror above the vanity. The woman staring back looked like a stranger, pale, hollow-eyed, displaced. She'd left her father's house that morning as Cecilia Ashbourne. She'd arrived here as the Duchess of Blackmore. But who was she really? What was left when you stripped away the names and titles and expectations? "No," she said quietly. "I can manage." Mrs. Holloway's eyebrows rose a fraction, the only expression Cecilia had seen from her. "As you wish. Dinner is served in the formal dining room. I'll send a maid to escort you at 7:45. The door closed with a soft click, and Cecilia was alone. She sank onto the edge of the bed, still wearing her traveling clothes, and let the silence press against her. In her father's house, there had always been noise, her sister's laughter, the cook's arguments with the butcher, her mother's endless worrying about money disguised as commentary on the weather. Chaos, yes, but life. Here, there was nothing. Just the ticking of a clock she couldn't see and the whisper of rain against glass. This is where you'll live now, she thought. This perfect, empty, silent cage. Her wedding ring caught the fading light. A heavy band of gold and diamonds that belonged to the Blackmore family, passed down through centuries. It didn't fit properly. Too loose on her finger, sliding around when she moved her hand. Like everything else about this marriage, it hadn't been made for her. A knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." A young woman entered, barely 18, with dark curls escaping from beneath her cap, and eyes that darted nervously around the room. "Begging your pardon, Your Grace, I'm Annie. I've been assigned as your lady's maid, if it pleases you." Annie. Cecilia tried to smile, though it felt like lifting a weight. You don't need to look so frightened. I won't bite. The girl's shoulders dropped half an inch. Mrs. Holloway said I was to help you dress, Your Grace, and to learn your preferences so I can serve you proper. My preferences? Cecilia almost laughed. What were her preferences? What did she want in this new life that had been chosen for her? Tell me, Annie, how long have you worked here? 3 years, Your Grace, since I was 15. And the Duke? What's he like? As an employer, I mean. Annie's face went carefully blank. His Grace is fair. He pays well, expects things done right and done quiet. Quiet. There was that word again, hanging over everything like fog. Mrs. Holloway runs the house, then? Oh, yes, Your Grace, every bit of it. She's been here 20 years, since before the Duke's father passed. She knows everything, where every spoon goes, how each room should be kept, who does what and when. Annie hesitated. She don't like change much. I see. Cecilia stood, running her hands over her wrinkled traveling dress. Well, let's not give her cause for complaint. Help me look presentable, Annie. I have dinner with my husband. The word felt strange in her mouth. Husband. As if saying it might make it true. The formal dining room could have hosted 50 people. Instead, it held 2. Cecilia sat at one end of a table so long she could barely make out the Duke's features at the other end through the candelabra and elaborate centerpiece. Between them stretched an expanse of polished mahogany, set with enough silver and crystal to stock a palace. He hadn't looked up when she entered. Servants moved like ghosts, placing course after course before them. Turtle soup, poached fish, roasted pheasant, vegetable accompaniments so artfully arranged they looked like paintings. The food was exquisite. The silence was suffocating. Cecilia watched him over the rim of her wine glass. Adrian Blackmore, Duke of Blackmore, master of this estate, and 3 others. One of the wealthiest men in England. He ate with precise, economical movements, his attention on his plate. His dark hair was slightly too long for fashion, falling over his forehead when he leaned forward. Strong jaw, straight nose, the kind of classical features that would have been handsome if they'd held any animation. But there was nothing. No expression, no warmth, no acknowledgement that she existed. She set down her glass with enough force that it clinked against the china. He didn't react. Tell me, she said, her voice carrying down the absurd length of table, is this how we'll dine every evening? Like strangers at opposite ends of a battlefield? Finally, he looked up. Those gray eyes fixed on her with all the warmth of a winter storm. I prefer to eat without unnecessary conversation. Unnecessary conversation. She smiled, though it had teeth. Is that what our marriage will be, then? A series of necessary obligations performed in silence? I don't expect you to understand the demands on my time, madam. I have estates to manage, business interests that require attention, responsibilities. Of course. Cecilia cut across him, her voice steady despite the anger building in her chest. Responsibilities. That's what I am, isn't it? Another item on your ledger. The Duke requires an heir, therefore the Duke acquires a wife. Transaction complete. His jaw tightened, the first real expression she'd seen. You knew the terms of this arrangement when you accepted. Did I have a choice? The words came out sharper than she'd intended. My father owed debts he couldn't pay. Your name came up in conversation. A month later, I was walking down an aisle. Where exactly was my choice in that? Your father agreed. My father sold me. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Let's not dress it up as anything else. He needed money. You needed a wife of appropriate breeding, and I was available. Well, here I am, Your Grace. You've acquired your Duchess. Now what? The silence that followed felt dangerous. Adrian stood as well, his movements controlled, deliberate. Even his anger was restrained. Now you will conduct yourself with the dignity befitting your position. You will manage the household affairs I delegate to you. You will accompany me to necessary social functions. You will be seen and not heard? Cecilia's laugh was bitter. Ornament your arm at balls? Produce heirs on schedule? You want a doll, not a wife. I want... He stopped, jaw working. I want order. I want things done properly, without drama or complication. Is that too much to ask? And what do I get? She moved around the table, closing the distance between them. What do I want? Did that question ever cross your mind? He looked at her then, really looked, for the first time since the ceremony. She saw something flicker in those cold eyes, there and gone too quickly to name. Surprise, maybe. Or recognition that the decorative object he'd acquired had a voice. "What do you want?" he asked finally. The question hung between them. What did she want? To go home to a house that no longer existed? To undo a marriage that was already legal and binding? To be loved by a man who'd made it clear she was merely a means to an end? "I want to not be invisible," she said quietly. "I want to matter. Even if I can't be loved, I want to be seen." Something shifted in his expression. Discomfort, maybe, or understanding he didn't want to acknowledge. He turned away, facing the fireplace. "This is not a fairy tale, Cecilia. I'm not going to sweep you off your feet. I need a duchess who can fulfill certain duties, manage certain aspects of my household, and conduct herself appropriately in society. If you can do those things, we'll have no difficulties. And if I want more than that," his shoulders tensed, "then you'll be disappointed." The word settled over her like frost. "I see." Cecilia straightened her spine, channeling every lesson in deportment her mother had ever drilled into her. "Then I suppose we understand each other, Your Grace. You've purchased a duchess. I'll endeavor to provide value for your investment." She walked to the door without waiting to be dismissed, without looking back. "Cecilia," she paused, hand on the doorframe. "Tomorrow Mrs. Holloway will brief you on the household management. I expect you to take those responsibilities seriously." "Of course." Her voice was empty of everything except perfect politeness. "Will there be anything else, Your Grace?" "No, that will be all." She left him standing there, alone in that vast room, and made her way back to her chambers. Only when the door was safely closed did she let herself feel the full weight of what had just happened. This was her life now, this cold, silent prison dressed up as privilege. The next morning arrived with mechanical precision. Annie woke her at 7, already carrying a breakfast tray. Tea, toast, soft-boiled eggs arranged just so. Everything perfect. Everything controlled. "His Grace left for London at dawn," Annie said, setting the tray on the bedside table. "He won't return until Thursday." 3 days. He'd been married less than 24 hours, and he'd already fled to the city. "I see. Thank you, Annie." The girl hesitated at the door. "Mrs. Holloway will expect you in her office at 9 o'clock, Your Grace, for your household briefing." "Of course she will." Cecilia forced herself to eat, though the food tasted like sawdust. Then she let Annie dress her in a morning gown of pale green silk, beautiful, expensive, appropriate for a duchess receiving instruction from her housekeeper. Another costume for another role she hadn't auditioned for. Mrs. Holloway's office was a study in ruthless efficiency. Ledgers lined the shelves, each one labeled in precise copperplate. A massive desk dominated the room, its surface covered in neat stacks of correspondence, menus, and household accounts. The housekeeper sat behind it like a general at headquarters. "Sit, Your Grace," she gestured to a chair that faced the desk. Not beside it, across from it, like a subordinate called for review. Cecilia sat. "The Duke has made it clear that you will assume certain household responsibilities," Mrs. Holloway began, not bothering with pleasantries. "I will outline what those are and what standards His Grace expects maintained." For the next hour, Cecilia listened to a litany of duties, rules, and expectations. She would oversee the planning of menus, subject to Mrs. Holloway's approval. She would manage the household budget, within limits the housekeeper had already established. She would coordinate with the head gardener, the estate manager, the various department heads, all of whom reported ultimately to Mrs. Holloway, who reported to the Duke. "In essence," Cecilia said when the housekeeper finally paused, "I'm to be your assistant." Mrs. Holloway's lips thinned. "You are to be the Duchess of Blackmore. That position carries certain ceremonial functions." "Ceremonial." Cecilia stood, her patience finally exhausted. "Mrs. Holloway, let me be clear about something. I understand that you've run this household for 20 years. I understand that you're deeply invested in maintaining things exactly as they are. But I am not a ceremonial figure. I am the Duchess of this estate, and I will not be relegated to signing my name on menus you've already approved." The housekeeper's face flushed. "His Grace specifically instructed—" "His Grace is my husband, not my superior officer." The words came out harder than Cecilia intended, but she didn't soften them. We will find a way to work together, Mrs. Holloway, but it will be as partners, not as supervisor and subordinate. Do I make myself clear?" For a long moment they stared at each other across the desk. "Perfectly clear, Your Grace." Mrs. Holloway's voice could have frozen water. "Will there be anything else?" "Yes?" Cecilia moved to the door, then turned back. "I'd like to tour the servant quarters this afternoon. All of them. I want to meet every person who works in this house and understand their conditions. Please arrange it." "The servant quarters?" Mrs. Holloway looked genuinely shocked. "Your Grace, that's highly irregular." "Then we'll be irregular together. 2 o'clock?" She left before the housekeeper could respond, her heart pounding against her ribs. It wasn't much of a rebellion, touring her own household, but it was something, a line drawn, a declaration that she wouldn't simply disappear into the wallpaper. The estate was enormous, and most of it felt like a stage set. Beautiful rooms that no one used, furniture covered in cloth, corridors that echoed with emptiness. Cecilia wandered for hours, learning the geography of her new prison. The portrait gallery held dozens of stern-faced blackamoors, all looking vaguely disappointed with posterity. The library held thousands of books arranged by size rather than subject, their spines barely creased. Everything was preserved, protected, and utterly lifeless. She found herself in the conservatory, a glass-roofed room filled with exotic plants. Here, finally, was something alive. Green growing things reaching toward the light, jasmine blooming in defiance of the English winter. "Beautiful, aren't they?" Cecilia spun around. An elderly man in gardener's clothes stood near the door, pruning shears in hand. His face was weathered, kind, completely unlike everyone else she'd met in this house. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to intrude." "You're not intruding, Your Grace. This is your conservatory now." He smiled, and the expression transformed his face. "I'm Griffiths, head gardener for 40 years, since before His Grace was born." "Griffiths." She moved closer, examining a plant with strange purple flowers. "What is this one?" "Passion flower. Brought it back from Brazil 20 years ago. Temperamental thing. Needs exactly the right amount of water, specific temperature, particular soil. Most people can't be bothered with something so demanding. But you can." "Well," he snipped off a dead leaf with careful precision. "Beautiful things are usually worth the trouble, aren't they? Even when they're difficult." Cecilia looked at him sharply, wondering if he was talking about plants or making a comment about the new Duchess. But his expression was guileless, focused on his work. "The Duke used to come here as a boy," Griffiths continued, moving to another plant. "Spent hours here, actually, before his father died. After that," he shrugged. "After that, he stopped coming." "What was he like? As a boy?" The gardener considered the question, his hands never stopping their gentle work. "Curious, quick to laugh, kind to the servants, always asking questions about how things grew, why things worked the way they did." He paused. "Then his father died, and he became the Duke at 20 years old. Had to grow up fast. Too fast, maybe." "That's not an excuse for coldness." "No, Your Grace. I suppose it's not." Griffiths looked at her directly. "But sometimes, understanding why someone built walls can help you figure out where the doors are." Before Cecilia could respond, the clock struck 2. "I should go," she said. "I have an appointment with Mrs. Holloway." "Good luck, Your Grace." The old man's eyes twinkled. "She's a tough one, but fair. And she loves this estate. Might be you have that in common." The servant quarters were not what Cecilia expected. Oh, they were clean enough? Mrs. Holloway ran too tight a ship for it to be otherwise. But the rooms were cramped, the bedding thin, the heating minimal. Cecilia walked through narrow corridors lined with tiny chambers where maids and footmen and scullery workers lived, and felt her anger building with each step. "How many servants share each room?" she asked. "The maids sleep 4 to a room," Mrs. Holloway said, her tone defensive. "It's standard for a household of this size." 4 women in a space barely large enough for 2? It's always been done this way. That doesn't make it right. Cecilia stopped at one room where a young maid was changing the linens on narrow cots. "What's your name?" The girl bobbed a curtsy, eyes wide with fear. "Mary, Your Grace." "How long have you worked here, Mary?" 2 years, Your Grace." "And these accommodations, are they sufficient?" The girl glanced at Mrs. Holloway, clearly terrified. They're fine, Your Grace. Be honest with me. Please. Mary's voice dropped to barely a whisper. It's cold in winter, Your Grace. We share blankets, but sometimes it's not enough. And there's only one washroom for all the female staff, so we queue in the mornings. I see. Cecilia turned to Mrs. Holloway. This needs to change. The housekeeper's face reddened. Your Grace, the household budget. I don't care about the budget. These people work themselves to exhaustion maintaining this estate. The least we can do is ensure they have adequate heat and privacy. Cecilia pulled out the small notebook she'd brought. I want a full accounting of the servant quarters. How many people in each room, what facilities they share, what improvements are needed. And I want it by tomorrow morning. His Grace will never approve the expense, then I'll speak to His Grace myself. Cecilia met the housekeeper's glare without flinching. These are not negotiable improvements, Mrs. Holloway. They're basic human decency. The tour continued in tense silence. Cecilia met stable hands and scullery maids, footmen, and kitchen workers. Some were sullen, clearly viewing her as another aristocrat playing at compassion. Others were cautiously hopeful, unused to anyone in authority caring about their conditions. She learned names, asked questions, and with each conversation felt the weight of her new position settle more heavily on her shoulders. This wasn't just about her anymore. All these people, their livelihoods, their well-being, were her responsibility now. The thought was terrifying and galvanizing in equal measure. That evening, Cecilia sat at her writing desk and composed a letter to her husband. She kept it formal, businesslike, outlining the conditions she'd observed and the changes she proposed. She listed costs, justified expenses, and made it clear that she expected his support. She didn't mention their argument, didn't plead or cajole, just laid out the facts and waited. 3 days later, Adrian returned from London. Cecilia heard the commotion of his arrival from her chambers, the clatter of hooves in the courtyard, servants rushing to attend him, Mrs. Holloway's voice issuing rapid commands. She stayed where she was, reading by the fire, and waited. He didn't come, not that evening, nor the next day. She saw him at dinner, another silent, separate meal across that ridiculous table. But he offered no comment on her letter, no acknowledgement that he'd even read it. Fine. If he wanted to ignore her, she'd work around him. Cecilia began meeting regularly with the household staff, learning the rhythms of the estate. She discovered that the cook had been ordering inferior vegetables because the estate manager was pocketing the difference in cost. She found that the footmen were working 16-hour days because positions had gone unfilled for months. She learned that Annie couldn't read, that Mary's mother was ill, that Griffiths had been asking for repairs to the greenhouse for 2 years without response. And slowly, carefully, she started making changes. Small ones at first, ordering better food for the servant hall, arranging for a doctor to visit Mary's mother, ensuring Annie had time off to visit her family. Nothing that required the Duke's approval, but then she went further. I want those rooms divided, she told the estate carpenter, showing him plans she'd drawn up. 2 servants per room instead of 4, proper beds, adequate heating. Your Grace, that's a significant expense. I'm aware. Begin work immediately. She hired 3 additional footmen to ease the workload, ordered new uniforms that actually fit, replaced the broken stove in the servant kitchen, paid for reading lessons for any staff who wanted them. Every decision she documented meticulously in the household ledgers, making sure the accounts remained transparent. She wasn't trying to hide what she was doing, she was daring him to stop her. A week passed, then 2. The estate began to change in subtle ways. Servants smiled more, worked more efficiently. The tense silence that had permeated the house began to ease. Laughter drifted up from the servant quarters in the evenings, not loud enough to disturb, but present. Human. Mrs. Holloway watched it all with tight-lipped disapproval, but even she couldn't argue with the results. The household ran more smoothly than it had in years. And still, Adrian said nothing, until one evening when Cecilia was in the library going over accounts, and he walked in. She looked up from her ledger, surprised. He rarely used this room. Your Grace. She stood observing the formality he seemed to prefer. He held her letter in his hand. These improvements you've been making. Yes? They're expensive. They're necessary. Cecilia kept her voice level. The household runs on the labor of people who deserve basic dignity. I'm ensuring they have it. He moved to the window, looking out over the darkened gardens. My father believed in keeping a distance between master and servant, maintaining proper boundaries. Your father is dead. The words came out harsher than she intended. And boundaries don't require cruelty. Adrian turned, and for the first time, she saw real emotion in his face. Anger, yes, but also something that might have been pain. You don't know anything about my father. Then tell me. Cecilia closed the ledger, giving him her full attention. Help me understand why running a household with basic compassion is so threatening to you. It's not... He stopped, jaw working. It's not about compassion. It's about order. About maintaining systems that work. Systems that work for whom? Certainly not for the people sleeping four to a freezing room. They're servants. They understand they're human beings. Cecilia moved toward him, her frustration finally breaking through her careful control. They have mothers and sisters and children they're supporting on wages that barely cover bread. They work until their hands bleed and their feet can't carry them. And you want to talk about maintaining distance? I don't expect you to understand the complexity. Stop! The word cracked through the room like a whip. Stop condescending to me. Stop acting like I'm too simple or too female or too new to this to understand what you're really afraid of. That stopped him. And what am I afraid of? Connection. Cecilia held his gaze. You're terrified that if you let anyone close, servant or wife, they might ask something of you beyond duty and obligation. They might expect you to be human instead of a title. The silence that followed felt explosive. When Adrian finally spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. You know nothing about what I've been through, what this position demands. Because you won't tell me. The words burst out of her, months of frustration igniting. You won't talk to me, won't look at me, won't acknowledge that I exist except as a line item in your household accounts. You bought a wife like you'd buy a horse, and now you're angry that she has opinions. I gave you a position most women would kill for. You gave me a cage. Cecilia's voice shook. A beautiful, expensive, suffocating cage. And you want me to be grateful for it because at least the bars are made of gold. He stared at her, something dangerous flickering in those cold eyes. What do you want from me, Cecilia? Everything, nothing, something in between. I want you to see me, she said finally, exhausted. Not as a duchess or a duty or a solution to your heir problem. As a person. Is that really so impossible? For a long moment he didn't answer. Then he walked to the door, his movements rigid with controlled emotion. I've approved your household improvements, he said without looking back. The funds will be available tomorrow. Use them wisely. Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the library with a hollow victory and the echoing silence of a marriage that felt more like a war. But she had won something, hadn't she? The servants would have better conditions. The household would run more humanely. She had made a difference, even if the man she'd married remained as distant as ever. Cecilia returned to her ledger, forcing herself to focus on numbers and practicalities. This was who she would have to be now. Efficient, strategic, effective. If she couldn't have love or partnership, she would build something else. Power, maybe. Or at least influence. She would not be invisible. Even if being seen meant constant battle, she would fight. The alternative, fading into the background of her own life, was unthinkable. Winter deepened, and with it, Cecilia's transformation continued. The household improvements were just the beginning. She studied the estate's finances with the intensity of a general planning a campaign, learning where money flowed and where it stagnated. She discovered inefficiencies that had persisted for years, suppliers charging inflated prices, managers skimming profits, entire systems running on outdated methods because that's how it had always been done. She began attending estate meetings, much to the surprise of the various managers and administrators. At first, they indulged her presence with barely concealed condescension, the pretty Duchess playing at business. But Cecilia had learned from her father's failures. She knew what to look for, what questions to ask, where the vulnerabilities lay. Mr. Pemberton, she said during one meeting, interrupting the estate manager's droning report, you've listed expenditures for roof repairs on the tenant cottages, but I toured those cottages last week and the roofs are still damaged. Pemberton's face reddened. Your Grace, I assure you the work is scheduled. Where did the money go? She opened her ledger, showing him the numbers. You billed for materials 3 months ago. The cottages are still leaking, so either you're incompetent or you're stealing. Which is it? The room went silent. Adrian, sitting at the head of the table, looked at her with something that might have been surprise, or respect, or both. There were delays, Pemberton stammered. I want the real accounting on my desk by tomorrow morning, Cecilia said calmly. And if those roofs aren't repaired by week's end, you'll be seeking employment elsewhere. Are we clear? She didn't wait for an answer, turning her attention to the next item on the agenda. After the meeting, as the managers filed out looking shell-shocked, Adrian lingered. That was unnecessary, he said, but his tone lacked conviction. Pemberton has been embezzling from the estate for at least 2 years, Cecilia replied, organizing her papers. I have documentation, receipts for work never completed, inflated costs, phantom suppliers. Unless you'd prefer I let it continue? He said nothing for a moment, studying her with those unreadable gray eyes. When did you become an accountant? When I realized no one else was paying attention. She met his gaze steadily. These are your lands, Your Grace. Your tenants, your wealth. If you don't care enough to protect them, someone should. I care. The words came out defensive. Do you? Or do you just care about maintaining appearances while other people handle the messy details? Cecilia closed her ledger with a decisive snap. Because from where I'm standing, you've spent years hiding in duty and distance while your estate crumbles around you. That's not fair, isn't it? She stood, gathering her things. You want order and efficiency, but you won't engage with the reality of how things actually run. You want a smoothly operating household, but you ignore the people who make it function. You want a marriage, but you refuse to speak to your wife. At some point, Your Grace, you have to stop delegating your life to others and actually live it. She left him standing there, surrounded by ledgers and reports, and the consequences of his careful detachment. Over the following weeks, word spread through the estate. The new Duchess was not to be trifled with. She walked the lands in practical boots, visiting tenants and inspecting properties. She knew the names of every servant, every farmer, every family living on Blackmore lands. And she didn't just know names, she knew situations, struggles, needs. When old Thomas Harper's barn burned down, Cecilia arranged for materials and labor to rebuild it before the week was out. When young Sophie Mitchell showed promise as a seamstress, Cecilia hired her to help with the household mending and paid for additional training. When the village school needed books, they appeared, along with a regular stipend for the teacher's salary. The changes rippled outward like stones in water. And people noticed. The local gentry, who had initially dismissed the new Duchess as a pretty ornament on the Duke's arm, began to pay attention. Invitations arrived, for tea, for cards, for small, intimate dinners where the real business of their world was conducted. The women wanted to know her secrets for household management. The men wanted to understand how she'd identified the embezzlement their own estates likely suffered from. Cecilia accepted every invitation. She was charming, tactful, brilliant in conversation. She listened more than she spoke, learned the intricate web of relationships and rivalries that defined their social world. She made allies carefully, avoiding entanglements with the more vicious gossips while cultivating connections with people of genuine influence. And through it all, Adrian watched from a distance, present but separate, married but alone. They still barely spoke, still dined at opposite ends of that absurd table, still lived in separate wings of a house that had too many rooms and not enough warmth. But something had shifted. In the estate meetings, he no longer dismissed her contributions. When she made decisions about the household, he didn't countermand them. They existed in a strange state of parallel operation. Two people managing the same estate without quite acknowledging each other's existence. Until the night of Lady Ashford's ball. It was the first major social event of the season, and attendance was mandatory for anyone who wanted to maintain their standing in society. Cecilia dressed carefully in a gown of midnight blue silk, her mother's pearls at her throat. Annie had arranged her hair in an elegant style that made her look older, more sophisticated, more like a duchess. Adrian was waiting in the entrance hall, immaculate in evening dress. He looked at her as she descended the stairs, and for just a moment his careful mask slipped. She saw surprise there. Maybe even appreciation. Then it was gone, replaced by his usual cool formality. "You look presentable," he said. Cecilia almost laughed at the understatement. How gratifying. The carriage ride to Ashford House was silent, both of them staring out opposite windows. But when they arrived, Adrian offered his arm with practiced courtesy, and they entered together, the Duke and Duchess of Blackmore, a matched pair of elegant strangers. The ballroom glittered with candlelight and jewels. Hundreds of people clustered in groups, their laughter and conversation creating a wall of sound, and all of them turned to watch as the Blackmores were announced. Cecilia felt the weight of their attention like a physical thing. These people knew. They knew this marriage was an arrangement, knew she'd been bought to solve a problem. The question was whether they'd accept her or dismiss her as another ambitious nobody who'd married above her station. Time to find out. She smiled her brightest smile, held her head high, and walked into the lion's den on her husband's arm. Lady Ashford descended on them immediately. "Your Graces, how wonderful that you could attend. Duchess, I've heard such interesting things about your management of the Blackmore estate. You simply must tell me how you've achieved such remarkable improvements in such a short time." "You're very kind, Lady Ashford." Cecilia navigated the conversation with careful precision, offering just enough information to seem open without revealing anything of substance. "I've been blessed with excellent staff and willing partners in the work." "And His Grace must be so pleased with your success." Lady Ashford's eyes gleamed with curiosity, poorly disguised as politeness. Adrian's expression remained neutral. "My wife has proven quite capable." "My wife. Not the Duchess, or Her Grace." Something small shifted in Cecilia's chest at those words, though she didn't let it show. The evening progressed in waves of introductions, dances, and careful conversation. Cecilia found herself surrounded by women who wanted her advice, men who wanted to discuss estate management, and younger ladies who saw her as a figure of fascination, someone who had married a duke and somehow maintained her own identity. She danced with various gentlemen, always proper, always appropriate, and through it all she felt Adrian's eyes on her, watching from across the room. Near midnight, she stepped onto the terrace for air, exhausted from hours of performing. The London season hadn't even officially begun, and already she was tired of the endless social chess. "You're doing well." She turned to find Adrian behind her, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. He offered her one. "Thank you." She took the glass, surprised by the gesture. "I didn't expect you to notice." "I notice everything about you." The words came out before he could stop them, and for a moment his guard dropped completely. She saw a vulnerability there, quickly masked. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect? A decorative wife who'd sit quietly and nod at appropriate intervals?" "Yes." He leaned against the balustrade, looking out over the gardens. "That's exactly what I expected, what I thought I wanted. And now?" He was quiet for a long time. "Now I don't know what I want." It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to her. Cecilia moved to stand beside him, their shoulders almost touching. "May I tell you what I think? Can I stop you?" There was almost humor in his voice. "I think you built walls so high you forgot there was a world outside them. I think you confused control with strength, distance with safety. And I think—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I think you're lonely, just like me." He didn't deny it. "We could try," she said softly. "Not to fall in love, I'm not naive enough to expect that, but to be partners, to actually talk to each other, to build something real instead of this elaborate performance we've been staging." For a moment she thought he might agree. She saw something in his eyes, a hunger for connection so deep it was almost painful to witness. Then Lady Catherine Ashford stepped onto the terrace, young and beautiful, and looking at Adrian with undisguised interest. "Your Grace," she purred, ignoring Cecilia entirely. "They're forming sets for the next dance. You promised me a waltz, remember?" Adrian's face went carefully blank. "I don't recall." "Of course you do." Catherine moved closer, her hand brushing his arm. "At the Pemberton dinner last month, you said you'd save me a dance at the next ball." Cecilia watched the interaction with cold clarity. This was intentional. A reminder that Adrian had a life in London she knew nothing about. Friends, or more than friends, who had claimed to his attention. If His Grace made a promise, he should certainly keep it, Cecilia said smoothly. though something twisted in her chest. "Don't let me keep you." She walked back into the ballroom without waiting for a response, her champagne untouched. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. She smiled, danced, conversed, played her role perfectly. But inside, something had shifted. She'd offered vulnerability, offered partnership, and in return, he'd walked away to dance with another woman. The message was clear. When they finally left, well past 2 in the morning, neither spoke. The carriage ride home was silent. At the estate, they parted ways without a word. Him to his chambers in the east wing, her to hers in the west. Cecilia dismissed Annie and sat alone in the dark, still in her ball gown, feeling the weight of loneliness settle over her like a shroud. She'd done everything right tonight, been charming, intelligent, impressive, had made connections, strengthened her position, proven her worth in their social world. And it didn't matter. She was still alone, still invisible to the one person whose attention she desperately didn't want to crave, but craved it anyway. The realization settled into her bones with bitter clarity. This was her life. This beautiful, successful, utterly empty existence. She could build an empire of influence, could transform the entire estate, could become the most admired Duchess in England, and still be lonely in her own marriage. The thought should have broken her. Instead, it hardened into resolve. If she couldn't have his love or even his friendship, she'd build something else. She'd become so undeniable, so essential, so powerful in her own right that his indifference wouldn't matter. She would not fade, would not disappear, would not become another silent, suffering wife in a loveless arrangement. She would rise. And if he didn't want to rise with her, she'd leave him behind in his cold, perfect isolation. It was the only choice she had left. Dawn came too early, and Cecilia woke with her resolve crystallized into something sharp and unyielding. She'd spent hours staring at the ceiling, turning the previous night over in her mind. The moment on the terrace when Adrian had almost let her in. Then Catherine Ashford's perfectly timed interruption and his retreat behind familiar walls. No more. She was done waiting for him to see her, done hoping for scraps of attention. If he wanted to keep his distance, fine. She'd build her own world, and he could watch from the outside. Annie found her already dressed, sitting at her writing desk with a stack of correspondence. "Your Grace, you're up early." The girl looked worried. "Are you well? You were out so late." "I'm perfectly well." Cecilia sealed another letter with decisive pressure. "I need these delivered to London this morning. Can you arrange it?" "Of course, but—" Annie hesitated. "His Grace left for Parliament an hour ago. He won't be back until Friday." 3 days. Again. Running away to London the morning after a ball where they'd actually spoken to each other. "That's fine," Cecilia said, her voice empty of emotion. "I have work to do." The letters went out within the hour. Invitations to the most influential women in London society. Not asking for favors, but offering them. Her estate management insights. Her organizational methods. Her connections to reliable suppliers and honest tradesmen. She was building a network, and she was doing it without her husband's help. By afternoon, responses started arriving. Lady Pemberton wanted her advice on household reform. The Countess of Worthing asked her to speak at a gathering about improving tenant conditions. Mrs. Hartwick, a wealthy widow with connections throughout London, invited her to a private salon where women discussed everything from politics to philosophy. Cecilia accepted every invitation. Mrs. Holloway appeared in her study, looking disapproving. "Your Grace, this schedule you're planning, it's quite aggressive. His Grace might not approve of you spending so much time in London without him." "His Grace spends plenty of time in London without me," Cecilia replied, not looking up from her planning. "I'm simply following his example." "But a duchess traveling alone?" "I won't be alone. You'll accompany me along with Annie and an appropriate number of staff, unless you have objections to ensuring I maintain proper decorum." The housekeeper's mouth thinned. "Of course not, Your Grace." "Good. We leave Tuesday morning." Over the next weeks, Cecilia threw herself into London society with calculated intensity. She attended every gathering, every salon, every afternoon tea. She was charming without being simpering, intelligent without being threatening, sympathetic without being weak. Women confided in her. Men respected her. And slowly, inexorably, she became someone people wanted to know. Not the Duchess of Blackmore, Cecilia. She started a weekly gathering at Blackmore's London residence, a townhouse Adrian rarely used, preferring his club. Women came to discuss estate management, charitable works, educational reform. The conversations were serious, substantive, dangerous in their progressiveness. They talked about property rights, about education for girls, about the injustices woven into their world. "My husband refuses to let me see the estate accounts," Lady Thornbury said during one gathering, her voice tight with frustration. "He says it's not a woman's concern." "Then make it your concern," Cecilia replied. "Ask questions. Learn the names of the tenants. Walk the lands. You can't manage what you don't understand, and understanding is power." "Easy for you to say," another woman muttered. "You have the Duke's support." Cecilia almost laughed. "I have his indifference, which is better than his opposition. I act and he doesn't stop me. That's all the permission I need." The women looked at her with a mixture of admiration and envy. She'd become what they all wanted to be, independent within the confines of their world, powerful without overtly breaking the rules. What they didn't see was the cost, the loneliness that gnawed at her in quiet moments, the way her heart still jumped when she heard footsteps that might be Adrian's, even though she'd trained herself not to care. She saw him occasionally, in passing. At dinners he couldn't avoid, at balls where appearances mattered. They were polite to each other, cordial. Two strangers bound by law and living separate lives under the same roof. And then came the night at the Hartwick salon when everything shifted. Mrs. Hartwick's gatherings were legendary, small, exclusive, attended only by the most interesting people in London. Artists, writers, politicians, reformers, people who thought dangerous thoughts and weren't afraid to voice them. Cecilia arrived alone, having learned that confidence was better armor than a chaperone. The drawing room hummed with conversation. She recognized several faces. Lord Ashford deep in debate about parliamentary reform, Lady Whitmore discussing her latest novel, a young radical named Preston arguing for workers' rights. "Duchess Blackmore," Mrs. Hartwick swept forward, resplendent in emerald silk. "How wonderful you could join us. There's someone I'd like you to meet." She led Cecilia to a corner where a man stood examining the bookshelves. He turned at their approach, and Cecilia found herself looking into warm brown eyes and an open, intelligent face. "Duchess, may I present Mr. Thomas Aldridge. He's recently returned from India, full of fascinating ideas about social reform." "Your Grace," Aldridge bowed, his smile genuine. "I've heard remarkable things about your work on the Blackmore estates." "Have you?" Cecilia was surprised. "I didn't realize my efforts were so widely discussed." "You've improved tenant conditions, eliminated corrupt practices, and created a model for humane estate management. In certain circles, you're quite famous." His eyes sparkled with amusement. "Though I suspect that wasn't your intention." "My intention was to do what was right. If others noticed, that's merely a consequence." "How refreshingly honest." He gestured to a nearby seat. "Would you allow me a few minutes of your time? I have questions about your methods." They talked for over an hour. Aldridge was intelligent, passionate, genuinely interested in her ideas. He listened when she spoke, asked thoughtful questions, treated her like an equal rather than a decorative duchess. It was intoxicating, this simple act of being heard. "You should write about this," he said eventually. "Document your methods, publish them. Other estates could benefit." "Write publicly?" Cecilia shook her head. "That would be highly inappropriate for a woman of my position." "Why? Because society says so?" He leaned forward, earnest. "You have knowledge, experience, proven results. Hiding that knowledge because of arbitrary rules about what women should and shouldn't do is a waste. Worse, it's a betrayal of all the people your methods could help." The words struck something deep. How many struggling estates were there? How many corrupt managers stealing from tenants? How many servants living in conditions she'd witnessed? "My husband would never allow it." "Does he need to?" Aldridge's voice was gentle but firm. "You're not asking his permission to think. Why ask it to share those thoughts with others?" It was a dangerous idea, radical, exactly the kind of thing that could damage her reputation, embarrass Adrian, cause a scandal. Cecilia felt herself smiling. What would this publication look like? They spent the next hour sketching out ideas. A series of essays on household management, estate improvement, humane labor practices. Practical advice backed by real results, published under her initials rather than her full name, subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability, clear enough that those who mattered would know. "I'll need to think about this," Cecilia said finally. "Of course." Aldridge stood as she prepared to leave. "But don't think too long, Your Grace. The world needs voices like yours." She left the salon with her mind racing. The idea terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. To write publicly, to claim authority over her own experience, it was everything she'd been trained not to do. It was perfect. The carriage ride home passed in a blur of planning. She'd need documentation, case studies, specific examples. She'd need to be careful with her language, tactical in her approach. But she could do this. She would do this. The London residence was dark when she arrived. The staff had retired, leaving only a single lamp burning in the entrance hall. Then she saw light under the study door. Her heart sank. Adrian must have returned early from wherever he'd been. She wasn't ready to face him, not with this new idea still forming, fragile as blown glass. She tried to slip past, but the study door opened. "Cecilia." He stood silhouetted in the doorway, still in evening dress, a glass of whiskey in hand. Something about his posture was different, less rigid, more exhausted. "Adrian, I didn't expect you here." Clearly, his voice had an edge she couldn't identify. "Where were you?" "Mrs. Hartwick's salon." "Why?" "Until this hour? Alone?" Anger flared, quick and hot. "I'm hardly alone. I have a driver, a chaperone." "You were seen talking to Thomas Aldridge for quite some time." He moved into the hallway, and she saw his face was flushed, his eyes slightly unfocused. He'd been drinking more than usual. "We were having a conversation about estate management. Not that it's any of your concern." "Not my concern." His laugh was bitter. "My wife's spending hours in private conversation with a known radical, and it's not my concern?" "Oh, now I'm your wife?" The words burst out before she could stop them. "Strange. Most of the time I'm just another household expense." "That's not fair, isn't it?" She moved closer, done with pretending. "You ignore me for weeks, disappear to London without a word, dance with other women at balls while I stand there like a fool, and now you're concerned about my reputation? I saw you—" His voice went quiet, dangerous. "At the salon, through the window, laughing with him, looking at him the way you never look at me." The accusation hit like a slap. "How am I supposed to look at you, Adrian? You won't even have a conversation with me. You retreat behind walls and distance and perfect bloody control, then get angry when I find someone who actually treats me like a human being? I never asked you to—" He stopped, jaw working. "To what? To care? To want more than this empty arrangement?" Cecilia's voice shook. "Too late. I made that mistake already." The silence that followed was explosive. "You don't understand," Adrian said finally, each word careful. "The position I'm in, the expectations, the way people watch, judge, wait for any sign of weakness. So you married me to project strength, to show the world the Duke had everything under control?" "Yes." The admission seemed to cost him. "That's exactly why I married you. I needed a Duchess who could fulfill the role, maintain the image, and not demand more than I could give. And what can you give?" She was crying now, angry tears she didn't bother to hide. "What are you capable of beyond duty and distance?" He stared at her, something breaking in his expression. "I don't know. I've spent so long being what everyone needs me to be that I don't know what's left underneath." The honesty stopped her anger cold. "Adrian, no?" He set down his glass with deliberate care. "You wanted the truth. Here it is. I don't know how to be a husband. I don't know how to let someone close without feeling like I'm losing control. And when I see you becoming this brilliant, powerful, independent force," his voice cracked, "it terrifies me. Because I realize I'm not enough. I was never going to be enough for someone like you." Cecilia stood frozen, watching him reveal himself with painful vulnerability. "So I push you away," he continued, each word dragged out like broken glass. "I keep my distance, I maintain control, I pretend it doesn't matter that you're slipping further from me every day, because if I admitted how much I—" He stopped. "It doesn't matter." "How much you what?" He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw everything he'd been hiding, fear and longing and desperate suppressed need. How much I've started to care, he whispered. How much it destroys me to watch you shine for everyone except me. The world seemed to stop. You care. Her voice was barely audible. I have no right to. You've been very clear that this arrangement doesn't require affection. He moved to the window, putting distance between them again. But apparently my feelings didn't get the message. Cecilia's mind spun. This man who'd bought her like property, ignored her like furniture, treated her like an obligation? He cared? Why didn't you say something? She asked. Why let me think I was nothing to you? Because you deserve better than what I can offer. His reflection in the dark window looked haunted. You deserve someone warm and open and capable of the kind of love you should have, not a man who barely knows how to feel anything beyond duty. That's not your choice to make. The anger returned, sharp as a blade. You don't get to decide what I deserve. You don't get to push me away for my own good while hiding behind noble suffering. He turned. Then what do you want from me? I want you to try. The words came out raw. I want you to stop hiding, stop running, stop pretending that maintaining perfect control is more important than being human. I don't know if I can. Then learn. She moved closer, closing the distance he always maintained. We're both broken, Adrian. Both damaged by the lives we were forced into, but we could... Her voice caught. We could try to build something real, if you're brave enough to risk it. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then slowly, hesitantly, he reached out and touched her face, the first intentional, gentle contact since their wedding day. I'm not good at this, he said quietly. Neither am I. We'll figure it out together. His thumb traced her cheekbone, and she saw him struggling with something, years of conditioning warring against desperate want. Then he kissed her. It wasn't practiced or smooth, it was awkward and intense, and full of barely controlled emotion. His hands shook as they framed her face, and she tasted whiskey and vulnerability and years of loneliness. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. I don't want to hurt you, he whispered. Too late. You already have. But maybe... She closed her eyes. Maybe we can hurt less going forward. He pulled her close, and for the first time since their wedding, she felt the solid warmth of him, the rapid beat of his heart against hers. This wasn't romance. It wasn't love. It was two people in pain reaching for each other in the dark. It was a beginning. They stood like that for a long time, neither speaking, both afraid that words would shatter the fragile thing forming between them. Finally, Adrian pulled back slightly. This article you're planning, with Aldridge. She stiffened. How did you... The staff talks. I pay attention more than you think. His hand still held her. Tell me about it. So she did. Explained the essays, the goal, the impact she hoped to achieve, waiting for him to forbid it, to retreat back into control and propriety. Instead, he listened. Really listened. It's risky, he said when she finished. Publishing under your initials will fool no one. People will know it's you. I know. There will be scandal, talk. People will say you're overstepping, that I can't control my own wife. I know that too. He was quiet for a moment. Do it anyway. She pulled back to look at him. What? Do it. His voice was firm. You're right, about the estates, about the methods, about sharing knowledge. If people criticize you, let them. I'll handle it. Adrian, I've spent years caring more about appearances than substance. You've shown me how hollow that is. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. Write your essays. Change the world. I'll stand behind you. The trust in those words made her throat tight. This doesn't fix everything, she said carefully. One conversation, one kiss, we still have so much to work through. I know. He managed a smile, small and uncertain. But it's more than we had yesterday. Yes. She touched his face, mirroring his earlier gesture. It is. They stood in the hallway, two people who'd been strangers learning to be something more. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was real. And for now, that was enough. The London season roared into full force, and Cecilia threw herself into it with renewed purpose. She wrote her essays in the early mornings, when the house was quiet and her mind was sharpest. Detailed accounts of estate reform, practical advice on identifying corruption, step-by-step guides for improving tenant conditions. The words poured out of her, years of observation, months of hard work, distilled into clear, actionable guidance. Adrian read each one before she sent them to the publisher, offering suggestions, pointing out potential criticisms, helping her sharpen her arguments. They worked together in his study, their heads bent over manuscripts, arguing about word choices and strategic emphasis. It was the closest they'd ever been. "This section on labor contracts," he said one evening, tapping the page. "You need to be more explicit about the legal protections. Otherwise, managers will claim they're following your advice while still exploiting loopholes." "You're right," she made the note. "What about the part on wages?" "Brilliant, but prepare for backlash. You're essentially calling out half the aristocracy for underpaying their workers." "Good. They deserve to be called out." He laughed, an actual, genuine laugh that transformed his face. "You're going to be extraordinarily unpopular in certain circles." "I can live with that." She looked up at him. "Can you?" His smile faded into something more serious. "I told you I'd stand behind you. I meant it." The first essay published under the initials CAB, Cecilia Ashbourne Blackmore, and the response was immediate and divided. Progressive circles loved it. Lady Pemberton wrote to say she'd implemented several suggestions with remarkable results. Mrs. Hartwick reprinted portions in her intellectual magazine. Thomas Aldridge sent a congratulatory note calling her a visionary. Conservative society was less impressed. The Countess of Marlborough called it presumptuous. Lord Ashford dismissed it as a woman meddling in affairs beyond her understanding. Whispers circulated at balls and dinner parties. The Duchess of Blackmore was overstepping, embarrassing her husband, forgetting her place. Cecilia weathered the criticism with her head high. She'd expected resistance, welcomed it even. Every attack was proof she'd struck a nerve. But then Lady Catherine Ashford started circulating rumors. "I heard the Duchess practically threw herself at Mr. Aldridge at the Hartwick salon," Catherine said at a dinner party Cecilia wasn't attending. "Spent hours in private conversation. One wonders what the Duke thinks of his wife's radical associations." The gossip spread like fire through dry grass. By the end of the week, everyone was talking about the Duchess of Blackmore's inappropriate friendship with a known reformer. The whispers grew more vicious. She was having an affair, she'd abandoned her duties, she'd humiliated her husband. Adrian heard it all. Cecilia saw it in the tightness around his eyes, the carefully neutral expression he wore at social functions. "They're saying terrible things," she told him one night after a particularly brutal dinner party. "About me. About us." "I know. You could stop it. Distance yourself from my work. Make it clear you don't support my essays." "No." His voice was flat, absolute. "Let them talk. I don't care." "Adrian, this is affecting your reputation. My reputation is built on being cold and controlled and perfect. Maybe it's time people saw something real." He pulled her close. "I'm not abandoning you. Not for gossip, not for social pressure, not for anything." The words should have comforted her. Instead, they highlighted how precarious their position was becoming. The situation came to a head at the Marlborough Ball. It was the event of the season. Everyone who mattered would be there, and attendance was mandatory for maintaining social standing. Cecilia dressed carefully in a gown of deep burgundy, armor disguised as silk. Adrian waited for her at the bottom of the stairs, immaculate in black evening wear. He offered his arm without a word, and together they entered the battlefield. The ballroom glittered with malice poorly disguised as sophistication. Cecilia felt the stares, heard the conversations that stopped when they approached, saw the smug satisfaction on certain faces. "They're waiting for us to fail," she murmured. "Then we won't give them the satisfaction." Adrian's hand covered hers where it rested on his arm. "Remember, you're brilliant, powerful, and everything they're afraid to be." Lady Marlborough greeted them with a smile sharp as glass. "Your Graces, how wonderful you could attend. Duchess, I've been reading your essays. Such interesting ideas." "Thank you, Lady Marlborough. I'm glad they provoked thought." "Oh, they've certainly done that." The Countess's eyes gleamed, though some question whether it's appropriate for a woman in your position to be quite so public with her opinions. "Opinions backed by demonstrable results," Adrian said coolly. "My wife has improved our estate significantly. If others find that threatening, perhaps they should examine their own management practices. A small crowd had gathered, sensing confrontation. Of course, Your Grace, Lady Marlborough recovered smoothly. Though one does wonder about the Duchess's other activities. Her friendship with Mr. Aldridge, for instance. Such a radical gentleman. Mr. Aldridge is a respected reformer, Cecilia said, her voice steady despite the anger building. Our conversations have been entirely professional and entirely appropriate. Naturally. Catherine Ashford materialized beside the Countess, her smile poisonous. Though spending hours alone with a gentleman who isn't your husband does invite speculation, particularly when that husband is so often absent. The room went silent. The accusation hung in the air, not stated directly, but clear enough. Cecilia felt Adrian tense beside her, saw fury flash in his eyes. Lady Catherine, he said, his voice ice over steel. Are you suggesting my wife has behaved improperly? Catherine's smile wavered. I'm simply noting what others have observed. Then let me be clear. Adrian's voice carried through the ballroom. My wife's work is important, respected, and fully supported by me. Her conversations with Mr. Aldridge and others are part of that work. Anyone who suggests otherwise is spreading malicious gossip and will answer to me personally. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the controlled, distant Duke they knew. This was something raw and dangerous. Furthermore, Adrian continued, I find it rich that society so concerned with my wife's reputation seems unconcerned with those spreading lies about her. Lady Catherine, I believe you've said enough. Perhaps you should focus on your own conduct rather than scrutinizing my marriage. Catherine went pale. Across the room, her father looked furious. Adrian turned to Cecilia, his expression softening. Would you like to leave? No. She lifted her chin, addressing the room. I came here to dance and enjoy the evening. I won't let small-minded gossip drive me away. Then let's dance. He led her to the floor as a waltz began. They moved together in silence, surrounded by whispers and stares. Cecilia kept her head high, her expression calm, even as her heart raced. That was incredibly stupid, she murmured. You've made enemies. They were already enemies. Now they know where I stand. His hand tightened on her waist. I'm tired of pretending, Cecilia. Tired of playing by rules designed to keep everyone in line. You've shown me there's another way. A dangerous way. Perhaps, but at least it's honest. The waltz ended, and they stood in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by people who no longer knew quite what to make of them. Then Thomas Aldridge approached, his expression concerned. Your Graces, I heard the commotion. Duchess, I apologize if my association has caused you difficulties. You have nothing to apologize for, Cecilia said firmly. My work with you has been valuable and appropriate. Even so, he looked between them. Perhaps it would be better if we limited our collaboration. For your protection. No. The word came out sharp. Cecilia had spent months building her independence, her network, her voice. She wasn't giving it up now. I won't let gossip dictate my choices. If you're willing to continue working together, so am I. Adrian's jaw tightened, but he didn't contradict her. Very well, Aldridge said quietly, but please, be careful. There are people who want to see you fail. As he walked away, Adrian pulled Cecilia close. You realize what you've just done, refusing to distance yourself from him. It will fuel every rumor. I know. She met his eyes. But if I back down now, everything I've built collapses. They'll know they can control me with whispers and innuendo. And if I asked you to stop? For our marriage? For my reputation? Would you? The question hung between them, a test of everything they'd been building. Cecilia took a breath. Would you ask me to? He stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, he shook his head. No, I wouldn't, because the woman I'm falling in love with doesn't back down from fights that matter. The words hit her like lightning. Adrian, not here. He glanced around the ballroom. We should go. They left before the ball ended, walking out together while society watched and whispered and judged. In the carriage, Cecilia finally found her voice. What you said in there? I meant it. He looked at her in the dim light. I'm falling in love with you. I've been fighting it for months, telling myself it wasn't part of our arrangement. But watching you tonight, seeing your strength and courage, his voice roughened. I can't pretend anymore. We agreed this wasn't about love, that we'd be partners, build something practical. Plans change. He reached for her hand. I'm terrified of this, of feeling this much. But I'd rather be terrified with you than safe and alone. Cecilia felt tears burn her eyes. I don't know if I can trust this, if I can trust you not to retreat the moment things get difficult. Then don't trust me yet. Just don't shut me out. Let me prove I'm capable of this. She looked at their joined hands, his scarred and calloused from years of rigid control, hers ink-stained from writing essays that challenged their world. All right, she whispered, we'll try. The carriage rolled through London streets, carrying two people who'd started as strangers and were becoming something infinitely more complicated. Behind them, society churned with gossip and speculation. Ahead lay uncertainty, scandal, and the brutal consequences of choosing honesty over image. But for the first time since their wedding, Cecilia felt something that might have been hope. But hope, Cecilia discovered, was a fragile thing when built on society's battlefield. The scandal exploded within days. By Monday morning, every drawing room in London buzzed with the Marlborough Ball confrontation. By Tuesday, the caricatures appeared, crude drawings showing the Duke defending his radical wife while she danced with revolutionaries. By Wednesday, 3 families had canceled dinner invitations, and Lady Marlborough's weekly salon pointedly excluded Cecilia from its guest list. Adrian's political allies began to distance themselves. Lord Pemberton, who'd supported several of Adrian's parliamentary initiatives, sent a polite but firm letter suggesting the Duke consider the optics of his household management. The implication was clear: control your wife or lose our support. Cecilia watched the fallout from the London resident's study. Her latest essay proofs spread before her. The words blurred as she read the same paragraph for the 3rd time, her concentration shattered by the sounds of carriages arriving below. More cancellations, more social cuts, more consequences of their very public defiance. You should eat something. Adrian appeared in the doorway, a tray in his hands. Not delivered by servants, he'd brought it himself. I'm not hungry. Cecilia. He set the tray down, moved behind her chair. His hand settled on her shoulders, and she felt the tension there reflected back through his touch. This will pass. Will it? She gestured at the pile of correspondence on the corner of the desk. We've lost half our social connections in 3 days. Your political support is evaporating. And my publisher just sent word that booksellers are refusing to stock my essays because of the controversy. Then we'll find other booksellers. Adrian, this isn't sustainable. We can't just... She stopped, hearing footsteps outside. Mrs. Holloway entered without knocking, her face grim. Your Grace, there's a gentleman here to see you. Says it's urgent. Mr. James Wickham. Adrian's hands tightened on Cecilia's shoulders. I don't know anyone by that name. He says he's with the Home Office, Your Grace. He's quite insistent. The Home Office. Cecilia felt ice settle in her stomach. The Home Office didn't make social calls. Show him to the drawing room, Adrian said, his voice carefully neutral. We'll be down shortly. When Mrs. Holloway left, he moved around to face Cecilia. Whatever this is, we handle it together. You don't know what it is yet. It might be safer if you... Together. His tone allowed no argument. James Wickham was a thin man with calculating eyes and the careful posture of someone who dealt in secrets. He stood when they entered, his bow precisely calibrated to acknowledge their rank while maintaining his own authority. Your Graces, thank you for seeing me. We weren't aware we had a choice, Adrian said coolly. What does the Home Office want with us? Wickham smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'll be direct. The government is concerned about certain associations your household has developed, specifically the Duchess's relationship with Thomas Aldridge. Cecilia's blood ran cold. Mr. Aldridge is a respected reformer. Mr. Aldridge, Wickham interrupted, is under investigation for sedition. We have evidence he's been meeting with radical groups planning to undermine the government, distributing inflammatory pamphlets, organizing workers, encouraging civil unrest. That's absurd, Cecilia said. Thomas would never... You call him Thomas. Wickham's eyebrows rose. How familiar are you with Mr. Aldridge's activities, Your Grace? Adrian stepped forward, his voice dangerous. Choose your next words carefully, Wickham. I mean no disrespect, but his eyes said otherwise. I'm simply establishing facts. The Duchess has been seen meeting privately with Aldridge on multiple occasions. She's published essays promoting radical reform ideas that align suspiciously with his political agenda. And she's been attending salons where seditious materials are known to circulate. Those salons are attended by half of London society, Adrian said. Are you investigating all of them? We're investigating those who pose a threat to national stability. Your wife's very public advocacy for workers' rights, her criticism of established estates management, her calls for reform, these align perfectly with Aldridge's revolutionary rhetoric. Cecilia found her voice. I advocate for basic human decency, Mr. Wickham. If treating servants well and managing estates honestly is revolutionary, then perhaps the revolution is justified. The words hung in the air like a lit fuse. Wickham's smile turned sharp. I'd advise against such statements, Your Grace. The government takes a dim view of aristocrats promoting rebellion, however well-intentioned. Is that a threat? Adrian's voice could have frozen hell. It's a warning. The Home Office has been tolerant of the Duchess's activities thus far, but our patience has limits. If she continues associating with known radicals, publishing inflammatory essays, and using her position to spread dangerous ideas, he let the sentence trail off meaningfully. You'll what? Cecilia demanded. Arrest a duchess for having opinions? We'll do what's necessary to protect the realm. Wickham straightened his cuffs. I trust you'll consider this conversation carefully. Good day, Your Graces. He left, and Cecilia sank onto the settee, her legs suddenly unsteady. This is insane, she whispered. They're calling me a revolutionary because I think servants deserve heated rooms? Adrian paced, his mind clearly racing. This isn't about your essays, it's political. Someone wants me weakened, and they're using you to do it. Who? Several candidates. Lord Ashford's been opposing my parliamentary reforms. The Marlborough faction resents my support for limiting their land acquisitions, and there are always people who want to see powerful families brought low. He stopped, looking at her. But none of that matters if you're in danger. I'm not stopping my work because the government doesn't like it. Cecilia, no. She stood, anger overriding fear. This is exactly what they want, to silence me through intimidation. If I back down now, every woman who's been reading my essays, implementing my methods, finding her own voice, they'll all learn the lesson. Step out of line and you'll be crushed. And if they arrest you, if they fabricate evidence linking you to actual sedition, then you'll use your position to defend me. Isn't that what you promised? To stand behind me? He stared at her, conflict written across his face. I also promised to protect you, even from yourself. I don't need protection. I need partnership. She moved to him, took his hands. Adrian, I know this is terrifying, but we can't let them win by making us afraid. There's a difference between bravery and recklessness. And there's a difference between caution and cowardice. She softened her tone. I'm not trying to start a revolution. I'm trying to make life better for people who have no voice. If that's dangerous, so be it. He pulled her close, his arms tight around her. You're going to give me heart failure before I'm 40. You'll survive. She pressed her face against his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart. We both will. But even as she said it, doubt crept in. How far would the government go? How much pressure could their marriage withstand? The answer came sooner than she expected. That evening, Thomas Aldridge was arrested. The news spread through London like wildfire. Soldiers had raided his lodgings, seized his papers, dragged him to prison on charges of sedition and conspiracy. The evidence, according to official sources, was overwhelming. Pamphlets calling for the overthrow of the aristocracy, meeting notes planning workers' rebellions, correspondence with known radicals across Europe. Cecilia heard it from Mrs. Hartwick, who arrived at the townhouse pale and shaken. They're saying he planned to incite riots, she said, clutching a handkerchief. That he was using his reform work as cover for revolution. It's madness, Cecilia. Thomas is passionate, yes, but he's not violent. Do you believe the charges? I don't know what to believe anymore. Mrs. Hartwick's voice broke. But I know this. They came to my house too, asking about the salons, who attended, what was discussed. They asked specifically about you. Adrian, who'd been listening from the doorway, went rigid. What did you tell them? The truth, that the Duchess attended as my guest, that conversations were intellectual in nature, that nothing seditious was discussed. She looked at Cecilia with frightened eyes. but they seemed more interested in building a narrative than hearing facts. After Mrs. Hartwick left, Adrian was silent for a long time. "You need to distance yourself from Aldridge," he said finally, "publicly and completely. He's innocent. That may not matter. If they're determined to make an example of him, anyone associated with him becomes collateral damage. So I should abandon him? Let him face these false charges alone? You should protect yourself." Adrian's control finally snapped. "For once in your life, Cecilia, consider the consequences. They're building a case that you and Aldridge conspired to spread revolutionary ideas. Your essays are evidence. Your meetings are proof. Your friendship is motive. Then let them try to prove it in court. I've done nothing wrong. You think that matters? You think justice actually functions when politics are involved?" He grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "They can destroy you, strip your title, seize your property, lock you in prison. And I can't stop them if you insist on playing the martyr." "I'm not playing anything. I'm standing by my principles." "Your principles won't keep you safe. Maybe safety isn't the point." She pulled away, furious and terrified, and refusing to show it. "Maybe some things are worth the risk. Not your life, not your freedom." His voice cracked. "Not when I've just found you." The raw emotion in those words stopped her anger cold. "Adrian, I can't lose you." He turned away, hands braced against the mantel. "I spent years building walls, convincing myself I didn't need anyone. Then you crashed into my life and demolished every defense I had. And now they're threatening to take you away, and I'm supposed to just… what? Let you sacrifice yourself for an ideal?" Cecilia moved to him, wrapped her arms around him from behind. "I'm not sacrificing myself. I'm fighting for something that matters. You matter. To me. More than politics or principles or anything else." He turned in her embrace, his face stark with fear. "Please, distance yourself from Aldridge. Stop publishing for a while. Let this blow over." "And if I do? What then? I become the Duchess who backed down, who chose safety over conscience. Every woman who looked to me as an example learns that speaking up leads to surrender. Better alive and compromised than dead and principled." She pulled back, searching his face. "Do you really believe that?" He closed his eyes. "I don't know what I believe anymore. I just know I can't watch you walk into danger." "Then don't watch. Trust me to know what I'm doing." "That's not how this works." A sharp knock interrupted. Mrs. Holloway entered, her expression tight. "Your Graces, there are soldiers outside. They say they have a warrant to search the premises." The bottom dropped out of Cecilia's stomach. "A warrant for what?" Adrian demanded. "They claim evidence of seditious materials may be present. They insist on entry." Adrian's jaw clenched. "Show them in, and send for my solicitor immediately." The soldiers weren't subtle. They tore through the townhouse like a storm, rifling through papers, examining books, confiscating anything that looked remotely political. Cecilia watched them invade her study, seize her essay drafts, pocket her correspondence with Aldridge. The officer in charge, a Captain Morrison, supervised with cold efficiency. "This is harassment," Adrian said, his voice icy. "You have no legitimate cause. We have a warrant signed by the Home Secretary himself." Morrison didn't look up from the papers he was examining. "If you have concerns, take them up through proper channels." "I'll be taking them up with Parliament. This is an outrageous violation." "Your Grace," Morrison finally met his eyes. "I'd advise cooperation. Obstruction of a government investigation carries its own penalties." The threat was clear. Adrian fell silent, but his fury was palpable. They found what they were looking for in Cecilia's desk drawer. A letter from Aldridge discussing their collaborative work. Innocent on its surface, but Morrison's smile as he read it suggested they'd found their smoking gun. "The Duchess will need to come with us," Morrison said. "For questioning." "Absolutely not." Adrian stepped between Cecilia and the soldiers. "She's done nothing wrong. You have no grounds for detention." "We have grounds for investigation. She can answer questions here or at the Home Office. Her choice." Cecilia's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The moment she'd been warned about. Cooperate and potentially incriminate herself. Refuse and escalate the confrontation. "I'll answer questions," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Here, in my husband's presence." Morrison considered. "Very well, but understand, Your Grace, Cooperation now may influence how the government views your involvement with Aldridge's activities. They sat in the drawing room, Morrison across from them, a junior officer taking notes. The interrogation was brutal in its politeness. How long have you known Thomas Aldridge? Several months. We met at Mrs. Hartwick's salon, and you developed a close relationship. A professional collaboration, nothing more. Yet you met with him privately. Multiple times. To discuss estate management and social reform. Topics relevant to my published work. Morrison pulled out one of her essays. Work that advocates for dramatic restructuring of the social order, workers' rights, wealth redistribution, challenging established hierarchies. I advocate for basic fairness and humane treatment. If that threatens the social order, perhaps the order is flawed. Your Grace, Morrison's voice sharpened. I'd advise more careful answers. We have evidence that Aldridge planned to use your influence and position to spread revolutionary ideology among the aristocracy. That's a lie. Cecilia leaned forward. Thomas believed in reform through education and example, not revolution. You speak of him in past tense, as if you knew his plans. The trap snapped shut too late. Cecilia felt Adrian tense beside her. I speak of him as a friend wrongly accused, she said carefully. Morrison smiled. A friend you collaborated with extensively, whose political views align perfectly with your published writings, whose meetings you attended, whose causes you championed. He leaned back. The Home Office believes you were either complicit in Aldridge's seditious activities or an unwitting pawn. Either way, your conduct has endangered national security. This is absurd, Adrian started. Is it? Morrison cut him off. Your wife publishes radical essays calling for systemic change. She associates with known revolutionaries. She uses her position to influence other aristocrats toward progressive ideology. And you expect us to believe this is all innocent household management? I expect you to produce actual evidence of wrongdoing rather than twisting legitimate reform work into conspiracy. Evidence is precisely what we're gathering. Morrison stood. Your Grace, I strongly suggest you cease all publication, end all association with radical groups, and make a public statement distancing yourself from Aldridge's activities. Otherwise, he let the threat hang. Otherwise what? Cecilia stood as well, done with intimidation. You'll arrest me for having opinions, for writing essays, for believing people deserve dignity? We'll do what's necessary to protect England from internal threats. Morrison's eyes were cold. Consider this your final warning. The government's patience is exhausted. After they left, the townhouse felt violated. Papers scattered, furniture displaced, the sanctity of their home shattered. Adrian poured himself a drink with shaking hands. This is worse than I thought. They're bluffing. They have nothing but circumstantial. They have enough to destroy you. The glass slammed down. Enough to arrest you, try you, convict you on fabricated charges, and I can't. His voice broke. I can't protect you from this. Cecilia moved to him, took his face in her hands. Then we fight together. How? Tell me how we fight the government, the Home Office, the entire apparatus of state power. By not giving them what they want. They want me silent, frightened, compliant. If I become that, they win. If you don't, they'll imprison you. Maybe. She kissed him, gentle and desperate. But I'd rather be in prison with my integrity than free without it. He pulled her close, and she felt him trembling. I can't lose you. You won't. We'll... The door burst open. Mrs. Holloway, white-faced. Your Graces, you need to see this. They followed her to the entrance hall where a footman held a newspaper, his hands shaking. The headline screamed across the front page, Duchess of Blackmore implicated in sedition plot. Below it, a vicious article detailing her radical activities, her dangerous association with Aldridge, her revolutionary essays undermining society. Every innocent interaction twisted into evidence of conspiracy, every reform suggestion painted as revolutionary rhetoric. And at the bottom, a quote from an unnamed Home Office source. The Duchess's arrest is imminent. The Duke is cooperating with the investigation. I never... Adrian's voice was strangled with rage. I said nothing of the sort. They don't care about truth. Cecilia felt strangely calm, as if she'd stepped beyond fear into clarity. This is the final play. Destroy my credibility, isolate me from support, make my arrest seem justified. What do we do? She looked at him, this man who'd started as a stranger and become her partner in a war they were losing. We make them fight for it. We don't go quietly. Cecilia, I'm not backing down, Adrian. I can't. If I do, everything I've built, everything I've tried to achieve means nothing. He stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. Then we fight. But we do it smart. What do you mean? I mean, we don't wait for them to arrest you. We take the offensive. His strategic mind was already working. I'll call in every favor, every alliance, every connection I have in Parliament. We'll force the Home Office to justify their investigation publicly. Make them prove their charges in the light instead of through intimidation. That's risky. Everything's risky now. But sitting here waiting for them to destroy you is not an option. He took her hands. I have power, Cecilia. I've been too cautious to use it, too afraid of political fallout. But if they want to fight, they'll get one. For the first time since Wickham's visit, Cecilia felt something like hope. We need allies, she said, her mind racing. Other aristocrats who've implemented my methods, who've seen results. If we can show that my work has measurable benefits, it becomes harder to paint you as a revolutionary. Yes. Adrian was already moving to his desk, pulling out correspondence. I'll start with the lords who owe me favors. You reach out to the women who've supported your work. They spent the night strategizing, writing letters, building their defense. By dawn, messages had gone out to dozens of potential allies. By mid-morning, responses started arriving. Some were supportive. Lord Pemberton, despite his earlier distance, sent word that he'd speak on Adrian's behalf in Parliament. Lady Whitmore pledged to organize a letter-writing campaign defending Cecilia's character. Mrs. Hartwick, brave despite her fear, committed to testifying about the innocent nature of her salons. Others were less encouraging. Several lords refused to involve themselves, citing political concerns. Multiple society women sent regrets, unwilling to risk association with scandal. The Duke of Ashford sent a curt note advising Adrian to handle your household affairs before they destroy your political future. By afternoon, the Count was grim. They had support, but not enough. Not nearly enough to counter the government's machinery. Then a carriage arrived, unmarked and unannounced. The woman who stepped out was elderly, imposing, dressed in black silk that spoke of wealth and status. Cecilia didn't recognize her until she entered the drawing room and removed her veil. The Dowager Duchess of Pemberton, Lord Pemberton's grandmother, one of the most influential women in England. Your Graces. Her voice was sharp as a blade. I understand you're in trouble. Adrian bowed. Your Grace, we didn't expect. No one expects me. That's the point. She settled into a chair without waiting for invitation. I've been reading your essays, girl. Good work. Solid thinking. About time someone challenged the rot in our estate systems. Cecilia found her voice. Thank you, Your Grace. Don't thank me yet. I'm not here out of kindness. The Dowager's eyes were shrewd. I'm here because the Home Office's actions threaten every aristocrat who's ever questioned the status quo. If they can destroy a duchess for having opinions, none of us are safe. You're willing to support us publicly? Adrian asked carefully. I'm willing to do more than that. I'm calling in the Pemberton faction. All of it. Every lord, every vote, every connection we have. She leaned forward. The government wants to make an example of your wife. We'll make an example of the government. Show them they can't bully the aristocracy into silence. Hope flared, bright and dangerous. Why? Cecilia had to ask. Why risk your position for us? The Dowager smiled, and it was fierce. Because I'm 83 years old, girl. I've spent 6 decades watching women with brains and courage get crushed by men with power and fear. I'm too old to watch it happen again without fighting back. She stood, commanding despite her age. Parliament convenes tomorrow. The Home Secretary will have to answer for this investigation. Be ready to testify, both of you. After she left, Cecilia and Adrian stood in stunned silence. Did that just happen? Cecilia whispered. I think we just found our general. Adrian pulled her into his arms. This isn't over, but we have a chance now. That night, they didn't sleep. They prepared testimony, anticipated questions, built their case. They worked side by side, 2 people who'd started as strangers forging strategy in the face of destruction. Near dawn, Adrian looked up from his notes. Whatever happens tomorrow, Don't! Cecilia stopped him. Don't say goodbye. We're going to win this. I hope you're right. I'm terrified I'm wrong. She moved to him, wrapped her arms around his neck. But we're together. That has to count for something. He kissed her, deep and desperate, like a man memorizing the moment. Then the clock struck 6, and morning came with all its terrible possibilities. The parliamentary session began at noon. Cecilia dressed in her most conservative gown, armor disguised as respectability. Adrian wore formal dress, every inch the powerful Duke. They arrived at Westminster together, running a gauntlet of reporters and curious onlookers. Inside, the gallery was packed. Everyone wanted to witness the confrontation. The Home Secretary, Lord Ashford himself, stood to present the government's case. His speech was a masterpiece of insinuation and twisted facts, painting Cecilia as a dangerous, radical, corrupting society from within. The Duchess of Blackmore has used her position to spread seditious ideas, he intoned. Her essays call for the restructuring of our social order. Her associations with known revolutionaries prove her intent, and her refusal to cooperate with government investigators shows contempt for lawful authority. The chamber murmured, opinions dividing along factional lines. Then the Dowager Duchess stood. Lord Ashford paints a damning picture, she said, her voice cutting through the noise. But pictures can be misleading. I've read every essay the Duchess published. They advocate for efficient estate management, fair labor practices, and treating servants like human beings. If that's sedition, then every competent landowner in England is a revolutionary. Laughter rippled through the chamber. Ashford's face reddened. Furthermore, the Dowager continued, the government's investigation has been marked by harassment, intimidation, and violation of privacy. Soldiers ransacking a noble residence without genuine cause, threatening a duchess for having opinions. This is not justice, it's tyranny dressed in legal robes. The debate exploded. Lords argued, factions formed, alliances shifted. Cecilia watched it all from the gallery, her heart in her throat. Finally, Adrian stood to speak. My lords, he began, his voice steady and powerful. You've heard accusations against my wife. Allow me to present facts. Since implementing her methods, the Blackmore estates have increased productivity by 30%. Tenant satisfaction has eliminated labor disputes. Servant retention has saved thousands in training costs. These are not the results of sedition, they're the results of competent management. He pulled out ledgers, reports, documentation, hard evidence that Cecilia's work had measurable, positive impacts. But beyond economics, he continued, his voice softening, my wife has shown something this chamber often forgets, that power carries responsibility, that privilege demands duty, that our position means nothing if we don't use it to improve the lives of those we govern. He looked directly at Lord Ashford. The government fears her not because she's dangerous, but because she's effective. She's shown that reform is possible without revolution, that change can happen through example rather than violence, and that terrifies those invested in keeping things exactly as they are. The chamber erupted. Voices shouted support and condemnation in equal measure. Lord Pemberton stood, adding his voice to Adrian's. Then Lord Worthing, then the Earl of Kent. One by one, allies revealed themselves, men and women who'd benefited from Cecilia's work, who'd seen the results firsthand. But Ashford wasn't finished. Eloquent words, he said coldly. But words don't change facts. We have evidence of seditious conspiracy. Letters between the Duchess and Aldridge planning to restructure society. Meeting notes discussing systemic change. This is not estate management. It's revolution in disguise. Then present this evidence publicly, the Dowager demanded. Let us all see these damning documents. Ashford hesitated. They're classified for national security. Convenient, the Dowager's voice dripped contempt. You accuse but won't prove. You threaten but won't substantiate. Either show us real evidence or admit this is political persecution. The chamber held its breath. Ashford's face was stone. Very well. He signaled to an aide who brought forward a folder. Documents were distributed and Cecilia felt ice form in her veins as she recognized them. Her letters to Aldridge, innocuous planning for essays, discussions of reform methods, all twisted in Ashford's interpretation to sound like revolutionary plotting. Here, Ashford read aloud, we must change how people think about power and responsibility. And here, the current system cannot sustain itself. Revolutionary rhetoric in her own hand. Adrian stood again. Or the observations of anyone who studied history and economics. Those sentences in context refer to unsustainable estate practices, or they refer to unsustainable government. Ashford's control finally cracked. This woman threatens everything we've built. She spreads ideas that undermine hierarchy, question authority, encourage the lower classes to demand more. If we allow this to continue, where does it end? And there it was, the real fear, naked and exposed. Not sedition, not conspiracy, just terror that people might demand to be treated like humans. The Dowager smiled. Thank you, Lord Ashford, for such honesty. You've just admitted this entire investigation is about suppressing ideas you dislike, not protecting national security. The chamber exploded into chaos. Lords shouting, factions arguing, the entire edifice of government cracking along ideological lines. And in the gallery, Cecilia watched her fate being decided by forces beyond her control. The speaker finally called for order. This chamber will vote. Do we support the Home Office's investigation of the Duchess of Blackmore, or do we condemn it as governmental overreach? The vote was called. One by one, lords rose to declare their position. Cecilia stopped counting halfway through, her heart pounding too hard to focus on numbers. Finally, the tally was complete. The speaker's voice rang out. The motion to support the investigation fails. By majority vote, this chamber condemns the Home Office's actions as unjustified persecution. The gallery erupted. Cecilia felt Adrian's hand find hers, squeezing tight. They'd won. Barely, but they'd won. Ashford's face was murderous as he stalked from the chamber, his defeat public and humiliating. But as Cecilia and Adrian made their way through the celebrating crowd, she saw something in his expression that chilled her blood. This wasn't over. It was just beginning, and men like Ashford didn't forgive public humiliation. 3 days later, Thomas Aldridge died in prison. The official cause was suicide. Aldridge had apparently hung himself in his cell, overcome by despair. Cecilia knew it was murder the moment she heard. She stood in the townhouse study, the newspaper trembling in her hands, and felt the world tilt beneath her. They killed him, she whispered, to silence him, to send a message. Adrian took the paper gently from her shaking grip. We don't know that. Don't we? She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. A healthy man dies in custody right after a parliamentary vote condemns the government's investigation. That's not suicide. That's assassination. Even if it is, we can't prove it. So we do nothing? Let them murder an innocent man and pretend it's justice? We stay alive. Adrian pulled her close, and she felt his fear. We won the battle, Cecilia. Don't throw that away by charging into a war we can't win. But as she stood in his arms, staring at Thomas Aldridge's name in black ink, Cecilia understood something terrible. She'd been naive. She'd thought principles mattered, that truth would prevail, that fighting within the system could create change. She'd been wrong. The system protected itself, and anyone who threatened it, no matter how noble, how innocent, how right, would be destroyed. The funeral was small, almost invisible, exactly what the government wanted. Thomas Aldridge, revolutionary and reformer, was buried in an unmarked grave on the outskirts of London, with only a handful of mourners brave enough to attend. Cecilia stood in the rain, watching dirt fall on cheap wood, and felt something inside her crystallize into diamond-hard resolve. Adrian squeezed her hand. We should go. People are watching. She knew he was right. 2 government men stood across the cemetery, taking notes on who attended. Mrs. Hartwick had stayed away entirely, sending only a letter of condolence. Most of Thomas's friends had vanished, their courage evaporating in the face of state power. But Cecilia couldn't move, couldn't leave this man who'd believed in change, who'd treated her as an equal, who died because he'd threatened the comfortable lie that everything was fine. They think they've won, she said quietly. They think killing him will silence everyone else. They might be right. Adrian's voice was hollow. Fear works, Cecilia. You've seen it. Half of London won't speak to us. Your publisher canceled the rest of your essays. The salons have disbanded. Thomas's death sent exactly the message they intended. Then we send a different one. He looked at her sharply. What are you planning? I don't know yet. She turned from the grave, rain streaming down her face. But I'm done playing by their rules. Done pretending that working within their system will change anything. They murdered Thomas because he was effective. If we're going to honor him, we have to be more than effective. We have to be unstoppable. The carriage ride back was silent. Adrian watched her with worried eyes, clearly sensing the shift, but not knowing how to address it. Cecilia stared out at rain-soaked London and let her mind work. The government had power, legal authority, military force, institutional inertia, but they also had vulnerabilities. They'd overreached with Thomas's death, and the whispers were already starting. Suicide in custody, right after a political defeat? Too convenient. Too obvious. The question was how to exploit that crack before they sealed it over. Back at the townhouse, Cecilia went straight to Adrian's study and began pulling out correspondence, old estate reports, parliamentary records. Adrian followed, closing the door behind them. "Talk to me," he said. "Whatever you're thinking, we face it together." She looked at him. This man who'd transformed from cold stranger to fierce partner, and felt a surge of love so intense it almost derailed her thoughts. "The parliamentary vote was close," she said, forcing herself to focus. "We won, but barely. And that was before Thomas's death. If Ashford moves against us again, we might not have the support. So we need to strengthen our position. More than that, we need to change the battlefield entirely." She spread papers across the desk. "The government's power comes from controlling the narrative. They say what's dangerous, what's acceptable, what's true. But what if we bypass them completely? How?" My essays reached educated aristocrats through official channels, publishers, booksellers, salons, all of which the government can pressure or shut down. She pulled out a different stack of papers, letters from servants, tenant farmers, workers who'd read her work through unofficial channels. But there's another audience. People the government doesn't consider important enough to monitor. Adrian's eyes widened. "You want to distribute your work directly to the working classes." "I want to distribute information, facts about fair wages, workers' rights, what constitutes abuse versus acceptable management, not revolutionary rhetoric, just truth." She met his gaze. "The government can silence aristocrats through social pressure, but they can't silence 10,000 workers who know they're being exploited." "Cecilia, that's dangerous. If Ashford finds out, he's already trying to destroy us. What's he going to do, try harder?" She moved around the desk, taking Adrian's hands. "Thomas died because he believed people deserve dignity. If we back down now, his death means nothing. But if we finish what he started, if we give people the knowledge to demand better, then maybe something good comes from this nightmare." He stared at her for a long moment. "You realize this is exactly what they accused you of, spreading revolutionary ideas among the lower classes. I'm spreading truth. If truth is revolutionary, the system's already broken. And if they arrest you this time, Parliament might not save you. Then you'll think of something else." She smiled, fierce and determined. "You're brilliant at strategy, Adrian. Help me do this right." She watched him wrestle with it, fear warring against belief, caution against courage. Then something shifted in his expression, and she saw the moment he decided. "All right, but we do this smart. No direct connection to us, multiple distribution channels, careful language that can't be called seditious." He pulled her close. "And if it goes wrong, you run. Promise me." "I'm not running. Promise me, Cecilia. If they come for you, you don't play the martyr. You survive." She kissed him instead of answering, and he let her avoid the promise they both knew she wouldn't keep. They worked through the night, planning. Adrian used his connections to find printers who operated outside government oversight, small shops in workers' districts, men who printed labor pamphlets and didn't ask questions. Cecilia rewrote her essays, stripping aristocratic language, focusing on practical facts. How to recognize wage theft. What constitutes unsafe working conditions. Basic arithmetic for checking if you're being paid fairly. "It's not revolutionary," she said, reading through the draft. "It's just information. Information is power. That's why they're so afraid of it." Adrian sealed another letter to a potential distributor. "We'll need funding. These printers want cash, no records. Use the household accounts. Bury it in estate expenses." He raised an eyebrow. "Embezzling from ourselves to fund workers' education. Very respectable. We'll call it an investment in human capital." She grinned, and for a moment the weight lifted. They were doing something, fighting back, refusing to be crushed. The distribution network grew slowly. A printer here, a workers' organization there, a sympathetic shopkeeper willing to keep pamphlets under the counter. Cecilia's rewritten essays began circulating through London's working districts, passed hand to hand, read aloud in taverns, discussed in homes where aristocrats never ventured. The government didn't notice at first. They were watching the salons, monitoring aristocratic correspondence, tracking the people they considered important. They weren't watching common workers learning to read their wage slips. But the workers noticed. 3 weeks after Thomas's funeral, a delegation arrived at the townhouse. 6 men in workers' clothes, clearly uncomfortable in the grand entrance hall, but determined. Mrs. Holloway tried to turn them away, but Cecilia heard the commotion and came down. "I'll see them," she said. "In the study." "Your Grace, His Grace wouldn't approve." "His Grace is at Parliament. I'll take responsibility." She led the men into the study, gesturing for them to sit. They perched awkwardly on expensive furniture, caps in hands. The eldest spoke first. "Your Grace, we're from the Dock Workers' Union. We wanted to thank you." "Thank me? For the pamphlets? The ones about fair wages and working conditions?" He pulled out a worn copy of her essay, folded and refolded from passing through many hands. "This right here. This showed us our foreman's been shorting our pay for months. We confronted him, got our money back, and got him sacked." Cecilia felt something warm bloom in her chest. "I'm glad it helped." Another man spoke up, younger, angry. "We heard what they did to Mr. Aldridge, heard the government's after you too. We wanted you to know there's thousands of us now, reading your work, sharing it around. If they come for you, they'll have to go through us." "I appreciate that, but I don't want violence. Not violence. Witness." The older man leaned forward. "You've given us weapons, Your Grace, knowledge, facts, proof we're being cheated. We won't let them silence you for that. Too many people need what you're teaching." After they left, Cecilia sat in the study, holding the worn pamphlet they'd left behind. Her words transformed from aristocratic discourse into working-class ammunition. It was more powerful than any parliamentary victory. Adrian found her there when he returned from Westminster. "I saw workers leaving. What happened?" She told him, watched his expression shift from concern to something like awe. "You've built an army," he said quietly, "not of soldiers, of informed citizens. That's more dangerous to the government than any revolution. Is it enough?" "I don't know, but it's something they can't easily stop." He sat beside her. "Ashford's been quiet since the vote. Too quiet. I don't trust it." "Neither do I." They didn't have to wait long to discover why. The trap was sprung 3 days later, and it was elegant in its viciousness. Cecilia received an invitation to speak at a women's educational society, a prestigious group that met monthly to discuss literature and philosophy. The invitation was signed by Lady Thornbury, someone Cecilia knew casually, and the topic was estate management, perfectly respectable. Adrian was suspicious. "It feels wrong. Thornbury's connected to the Ashford faction. Which is exactly why I should go. Show we're not afraid." Cecilia studied the invitation. "It's at the Hartwell Club. Public venue, witnesses, completely proper." "Let me come with you." "To a women's society meeting? You'd stand out rather obviously." She kissed his cheek. "I'll take Annie and 2 footmen. I'll be fine." She should have listened to his instincts. The Hartwell Club was elegant and well lit, filled with well-dressed women when Cecilia arrived. Lady Thornbury greeted her warmly, leading her to the front of the room where she'd speak. Everything seemed perfectly normal, until Cecilia began her presentation and noticed the men at the back of the room. Not servants, they were too well dressed, too attentive, taking notes, watching her every word. Government agents. Lady Thornbury's smile turned brittle. "Please, continue, Your Grace. We're all so interested in your methods." The trap clicked shut. This wasn't a speaking engagement, it was evidence gathering. Everything Cecilia said would be recorded, twisted, used against her. If she spoke about reform, it would be called revolutionary rhetoric. If she discussed workers' rights, it would be sedition. If she refused to speak, it would be admission of guilt. For a frozen moment, panic seized her. Then her mind cleared, and she understood. They wanted her afraid, wanted her to either incriminate herself or retreat in fear. Either outcome gave them power. She refused to give them either. "Before I begin," Cecilia said, her voice carrying through the suddenly silent room, "I'd like to acknowledge our additional guests." She gestured to the men at the back. Government observers, I assume, here to ensure my discussion of household management doesn't threaten national security? Nervous laughter rippled through the women. The agents' faces remained stone. I'm happy to have them, Cecilia continued. In fact, I encourage them to take thorough notes. Because what I'm about to discuss is quite radical. The revolutionary concept that treating people well produces better results than treating them poorly. She launched into her presentation, but she'd changed tactics. Instead of abstract principles, she cited specific examples. The Blackmore Estate's productivity increases. Servant retention rates. Measurable economic benefits of fair treatment. She pulled out ledgers, showed numbers, made it impossible to call her work anything but practical business management. These results speak for themselves, she said. Fair wages reduce theft. Adequate housing reduces illness, which reduces lost workdays. Respectful treatment increases loyalty, which increases efficiency. This isn't philosophy, it's economics. The women were riveted. The agent scribbled furiously. Some have called these ideas dangerous, Cecilia continued, her voice hardening. They say teaching people to expect basic dignity will lead to revolution. I say if our system can't survive people being treated well, then perhaps the system deserves to fall. The room went silent. But I don't advocate revolution. I advocate evolution, gradual improvement through demonstrated success. I advocate sharing knowledge so that others can achieve similar results. And I advocate refusing to be silenced by those who benefit from ignorance and exploitation. She looked directly at the government agents. Take good notes, gentlemen. I want your superiors to understand exactly what they're trying to suppress. Not sedition, not conspiracy, just the radical notion that all people deserve dignity. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. The women surged forward with questions, requests for her pamphlets, pledges of support. The government agents slipped out, their notes clutched tight. Cecilia knew she'd just painted a target on her back, but she also knew she'd shown them she wouldn't be intimidated. Adrian was pacing when she arrived home, clearly having heard about the government presence. Are you insane? He demanded. You basically challenged them directly. I called their bluff. She set down her reticule, exhausted but exhilarated. They wanted to catch me inciting revolution. Instead, they got a lecture on estate economics backed by hard data. What are they going to charge me with? Effective household management? They'll find something. They always do. Then let them. I'm done being afraid. She moved to him, taking his agitated hands. Adrian, fear only works if we let it. The moment we stop caring about their threats, we become dangerous. You're going to get yourself killed, or I'm going to change things. Either way, I'm not backing down. He pulled her close, and she felt him shaking. I can't lose you. You won't. We're in this together, remember? The government's response came swiftly. Within days, new regulations were announced. All public gatherings required permits, all printed materials required government approval, all workers' organizations were under investigation for seditious activity. The noose was tightening, but something unexpected happened. The restrictions sparked outrage instead of compliance. Workers who'd been reading Cecilia's pamphlets began organizing, not in revolution, but in resistance. They formed study groups to discuss fair labor practices. They started documenting their working conditions, comparing them to the standards Cecilia had outlined. They began demanding accountability from their employers, and aristocrats who'd implemented Cecilia's methods began speaking up. Lord Pemberton published his estate results in the Times, hard numbers showing dramatic improvements. Lady Whitmore wrote an editorial defending practical reform. The Dowager Duchess gave an interview calling the government's crackdown the death throes of a failing system afraid of competence. The narrative was shifting, slowly, painfully, but shifting. Adrian watched it all from Parliament, where he'd become the face of reform within the aristocracy. He gave speeches about economic efficiency, about the moral bankruptcy of exploitation, about the necessity of gradual change to prevent violent upheaval. You're becoming a revolutionary yourself, Cecilia teased one evening as he practiced a speech. I'm becoming practical. If we don't reform willingly, we'll be forced to reform through violence. I'd rather choose the method. He set down his notes. The vote's tomorrow, on the new restrictions. Will it pass? I don't know. It's close. He rubbed his face, exhausted. Ashford's faction is strong, but we've gained support. People are starting to see that suppression breeds resentment. And if it passes, Then we keep fighting, just more carefully. He pulled her into his lap, burying his face in her neck. I'm tired, Cecilia. Tired of the constant battle, the endless strategy, the fear that every day might be the one they arrest you. I know. She ran her fingers through his hair. But we're winning. Can't you feel it? The conversation's changed. People are questioning things they never questioned before. At what cost? At whatever cost it takes. She lifted his face, made him look at her. Thomas died for this. I won't let that be meaningless. The parliamentary vote was brutal. Adrian stood in the chamber and gave the speech of his life, eloquent, passionate, devastating in its logic. He painted a picture of England's future if they continued down the path of suppression. He showed the economic benefits of reform. He made moral arguments and practical ones, appealing to fear and hope in equal measure. When he finished, the chamber was silent. Then Lord Ashford stood for rebuttal, and the real fight began. The Duke speaks beautifully, Ashford said, his voice dripping condescension. But he's been blinded by his wife's radical ideology. These restrictions aren't about suppression. They're about order, about maintaining the stability that's made England great. Stability built on exploitation, Adrian shot back, on treating people like tools instead of humans. That's not greatness. It's brutality dressed in fine clothes. Easy words from a man who's never wanted for anything. Ashford's voice turned sharp. The Duke enjoys his privilege while advocating we dismantle the very systems that created it. Perhaps he should ask his tenants if they'd prefer his radical reforms or the traditional order that's fed them for generations. I have asked them. Adrian pulled out letters, dozens of them, from Blackmore tenants, workers, servants. They prefer fair wages over charity, dignity over dependence, partnership over paternalism. Perhaps Lord Ashford should ask his own people what they prefer, if he dared to actually listen to their answers. The chamber erupted. Lords shouted. Factions clashed. The carefully controlled facade of parliamentary decorum cracked wide open. Finally, the speaker called for order and the vote. Cecilia watched from the gallery, her fingernails digging into her palms. She counted the votes as they were called, her heart sinking as the numbers stayed too close, too uncertain. Then the Dowager Duchess stood in the ladies' gallery and called out, "Pemberton votes no!" It was technically against protocol, but her grandson, Lord Pemberton, stood and confirmed. Pemberton votes no on the restrictions. Other lords followed, men who'd been wavering, now emboldened by the Dowager's defiance. The tide began to shift. When the final tally came, the restrictions failed by 7 votes. 7 votes between freedom and suppression. The gallery erupted in chaos. Cecilia felt tears stream down her face as Adrian looked up at her, his expression torn between relief and exhaustion. They'd won. Again. Barely. But Ashford's face as he left the chamber promised this war was far from over. That night the townhouse filled with supporters, lords and ladies who'd voted against the restrictions, workers' representatives who'd come to express gratitude, reformers who saw the vote as vindication. Cecilia moved through the crowd in a daze, accepting congratulations, hearing herself speak words she barely registered. Her mind was already racing ahead, calculating the next move, anticipating Ashford's response. She found Adrian on the terrace, alone, staring out at the London night. "You should be celebrating," she said, joining him. "Should I? We won a vote. That doesn't change the fundamental problem." He gestured at the city. "Out there, people are still being exploited. Workers still live in poverty while we argue about it in comfortable chambers. Thomas is still dead, and Ashford's still plotting our destruction. But people are paying attention now, questioning things. That's the first step toward real change." "Is it enough?" Cecilia leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth that had become her anchor. "It has to be, because it's all we have." They stood in silence, 2 people who'd transformed from strangers to partners to something deeper, bound not just by marriage, but by shared purpose and hard-won trust. "I love you," Adrian said quietly. "I don't think I've actually said that, not clearly." Her breath caught. "You're saying it now. I love you. Your courage, your brilliance, your stubborn refusal to accept injustice. You've changed everything, my estates, my politics, my entire understanding of what matters." He turned to face her. "I love you, and it terrifies me because I have so much to lose now." "I love you too." The words felt both enormous and simple. Even when you're frustrating and overprotective and trying to keep me safe from myself. He kissed her, gentle and fierce, a promise and a prayer. Behind them, the celebration continued. Beyond the gates, London slept, unaware that the world was slowly, painfully shifting beneath it. And somewhere in the shadows, Lord Ashford planned his next move. But for this moment, standing on the terrace in Adrian's arms, Cecilia let herself feel something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. Not naive hope that everything would be easy, but hard-earned hope that maybe, just maybe, fighting was worth it. That truth could triumph over power. That two people who'd started as strangers could change the world. The next morning brought news that shook London. Lord Ashford had resigned as Home Secretary. The official statement cited health concerns and a desire to spend more time with family. But everyone knew the truth. The failed vote had destroyed his credibility, and his resignation was a political necessity. "He's retreating," Adrian said, reading the announcement. "Regrouping, or he's been neutralized." Cecilia felt cautious optimism. Without his position, he loses access to government resources. Men like Ashford don't just disappear, they... A knock interrupted. Mrs. Holloway entered, looking shaken. "Your Graces, there's a mob outside." Cecilia's heart dropped. "Hostile?" "No, Your Grace. They're cheering. Workers, mostly. They heard about the vote and Lord Ashford's resignation. They want to thank you." They went to the window, looked down at the street. Dozens of people stood there, men in workers' clothes, women with children, faces she didn't recognize but who clearly knew hers. When they spotted her in the window, the crowd erupted. Not in anger, but in celebration. "For the Duchess," someone shouted. "For fair wages and dignity." Others took up the cry. They weren't calling for revolution. They were calling for her, the woman who'd given them tools to demand better without tearing everything down. Adrian pulled her close as they watched. "You did this. You changed how they see themselves. We did this. Together." That evening, letters arrived from across England. Estate owners reporting successful implementation of her methods. Workers' groups requesting more pamphlets. Aristocrats asking for guidance on reform. The movement was spreading beyond what she'd ever imagined. Lady Whitmore's letter made her cry. "You've shown us all that power can be used for good, that privilege carries responsibility, that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear win. Whatever comes next, know that you've already changed everything." "What comes next?" Cecilia asked Adrian as they prepared for bed that night. "We keep fighting, more carefully, more strategically, but we keep fighting." He pulled her into his arms. "The restrictions failed, but the mindset that created them hasn't changed. We've won battles, not the war. Then we'll win more battles, until the war becomes unwinnable for them." He smiled, and it was real. Not the cold mask he'd worn when they met, but genuine warmth. "When did you become such an optimist?" "When I realized I had something worth fighting for." She kissed him. "Worth surviving for." They made love that night with an intensity born of surviving danger together, of building something real from the wreckage of an arranged marriage. And afterward, lying in his arms, Cecilia felt something she hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not because the fight was over, but because she finally understood her own power. She wasn't just a duchess anymore. She was a catalyst for change, a voice for people who had none, a living example that the system could evolve without burning down. And that was worth every risk, every battle, every moment of fear. The world hadn't changed yet, but it was changing, and she was leading that change. But peace, Cecilia learned, was a luxury the powerful never allowed to last. The attack came not with soldiers or warrants, but with something far more insidious: money. 2 weeks after Ashford's resignation, estate managers across England began receiving letters from a new consortium, the National Agricultural Improvement Society. They offered generous loans to estates struggling financially, promising modernization and efficiency. The terms seemed reasonable, the credentials impressive. Adrian recognized the trap immediately. "It's Ashford," he said, studying the letter that had arrived at one of their smaller holdings. "Different name, same strategy. He's buying up debt, acquiring leverage over struggling estates. To what end? Control. If he can't win through politics, he'll win through economics. Get enough estates under his financial influence, and he can force them to reverse any reforms. Make an example of anyone who implemented your methods. Cecilia felt cold certainty settle over her. He's targeting estates that adopted my practices specifically. Probably. Punish success, create fear, make reform seem financially dangerous. Adrian threw the letter down in disgust. It's brilliant, actually. No government investigation, no public confrontation, just quiet economic pressure that destroys everything we've built. Can we stop it? I don't know. My resources are substantial but not infinite. If he's backed by other conservative lords pooling their wealth. He trailed off, the implications clear. They couldn't outspend the entire aristocracy. The scope of Ashford's plan became clear over the following weeks. 12 estates that had implemented Cecilia's reforms received offers from the consortium. 3 accepted immediately, their financial situations desperate enough to override caution. Within days, the new managers began rolling back reforms, cutting wages, reducing servant accommodations, returning to the exploitative practices Cecilia had fought to eliminate. It's working, Cecilia said bitterly, reading reports from her network. Workers are losing protections, being told the radical experiments failed. The message is clear. Reform leads to failure. We need to counter it. Show that reform actually works financially, that these estates are being sabotaged, not failing naturally. Adrian was already drafting letters. I'll reach out to the lords who supported us in Parliament. Maybe we can create our own consortium, offer better terms. That's playing their game on their field. Cecilia paced, her mind racing. We need something they can't counter with money alone. Such as? Truth, documentation, proof that reform works. She stopped, an idea crystallizing. We need to compile everything, estate results, productivity data, worker testimonials. Create an undeniable record that fair practices produce better outcomes than exploitation. A report? More than that, a complete accounting. Numbers they can't dispute, results they can't dismiss, evidence so overwhelming it becomes impossible to ignore. Her voice gained strength. We show the world that these estates aren't failing because reform doesn't work. They're being deliberately destroyed because reform threatens power. Adrian studied her. That's a massive undertaking. We'd need data from dozens of estates, verified independently, presented in a way that's accessible to both aristocrats and commoners. Then we'd better get started. They worked with obsessive intensity. Cecilia reached out to every estate owner who'd implemented her methods, requesting detailed financial records. Adrian used his parliamentary connections to access economic data. The Dowager Duchess contributed her family's historical estate accounts for comparison. Mrs. Hartwick helped organize the information into compelling narratives. The project consumed them. Days blurred into nights as they compiled evidence, cross-referenced numbers, built an unassailable case for reform. Annie brought meals they barely touched. Mrs. Holloway managed the household alone. The London season continued without them, society gossiping about the Duke and Duchess who'd become hermits. But the work was revealing patterns even Cecilia hadn't anticipated. Estates that implemented full reforms showed an average productivity increase of 43% over 3 years. Worker illness dropped by half. Turnover costs disappeared. Even accounting for increased wages, the net profit was higher. It's not even close, Adrian said, staring at the compiled data. Fair treatment is dramatically more profitable than exploitation. How did no one see this before? Because no one measured it. Everyone just accepted that squeezing workers was necessary for profit. Cecilia added another chart to their growing collection. We're proving them wrong with their own preferred weapon, cold, hard numbers. But numbers alone wouldn't be enough. They needed something more visceral, more human. The answer came from an unexpected source. Mary, the young maid who'd spoken to Cecilia during her first tour of the servant quarters, appeared at the study door one evening. She looked terrified but determined. Your Grace, may I speak with you? Cecilia gestured her in, concerned. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, Your Grace. I heard what you're doing, the report about how fair treatment works. And I thought, she pulled out a worn notebook. I've been keeping records of my life before you changed things and after. The notebook was filled with careful handwriting, dates, wages, expenses, hours worked, living conditions. A meticulous accounting of one servant's existence. Before the reforms, I sent my mother 2 shillings a month, Mary said quietly. Now I send 5. I used to work 16 hours a day. Now it's 10. I used to sleep in a freezing room with 3 other girls. Now I have a room with a friend and heat that works. She looked up, eyes bright with tears. Your grace changed my life. And I'm not the only one. We all have stories. Cecilia felt something shift in her chest. Mary, would you be willing to share this? Not just the numbers, but your story? If it helps, Your Grace. If it shows people that we're not just things to be managed, that we're people whose lives get better when we're treated right. She hesitated. There are others who'd speak too if you asked. Servants, workers, tenant farmers. People whose lives you changed. Within a week, Cecilia had collected dozens of personal accounts. Not abstract data, but human stories. A stable hand who could now afford medicine for his sick child. A scullery maid who learned to read in her newfound free time. A tenant farmer who repaired his cottage with wages that finally exceeded subsistence. Combined with the economic data, these stories created something powerful. Not just proof that reform worked, but evidence that it mattered. That behind every number was a human life made better. This is it, Adrian said, reading through the compiled document. This is what we needed. Now we just have to get people to read it. That proved easier than expected. Word of the project had spread through Cecilia's network, and demand was already building. Publishers who'd rejected her essays now competed for the rights. The Times offered to run excerpts. Mrs. Hartwick's intellectual circles wanted advance copies. But the real impact came from an unexpected quarter. 3 days before publication, a carriage arrived bearing the royal seal. Cecilia and Adrian exchanged shocked looks. The crown had remained studiously neutral throughout the entire conflict, neither supporting nor condemning the reform movement. The messenger handed Adrian a sealed letter. Inside was an invitation, or more accurately, a summons. Her Royal Highness Princess Charlotte requested the Duke and Duchess of Blackmore's presence at Kensington Palace. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock. Topic: estate management reform. The princess, Cecilia whispered. Why would she? Charlotte's always been interested in social issues, Adrian said, rereading the summons. But she's never publicly involved herself in politics. If she's breaking that pattern now, it could legitimize everything we've done. Or it could be a trap. Ashford's last play using royal influence to shut us down. Only one way to find out. They arrived at Kensington Palace precisely on time, dressed in their finest. Cecilia's heart hammered as they were led through ornate corridors to a surprisingly modest sitting room. Princess Charlotte stood when they entered, a young woman, barely 25, with intelligent eyes and a direct manner that immediately put Cecilia at ease. Your Graces, thank you for coming. She gestured for them to sit. I'll be direct. I've been following your work with great interest. My household staff brought me copies of your pamphlets months ago. Cecilia blinked. Your staff? Servants talk, Your Grace, and unlike many aristocrats, I actually listen to mine. Charlotte smiled. They've been implementing your methods in the palace households. The results have been enlightening. She pulled out her own ledgers, filled with the same kind of data Cecilia had been compiling. Improved efficiency, reduced costs, higher staff retention. I wanted to test your theories myself before weighing in publicly, Charlotte continued. Because if a princess endorses something, it carries weight. I needed to be certain. And are you certain? Adrian asked carefully. I've read your forthcoming report, all 600 pages. She tapped the manuscript on the table beside her. Your data is sound, your methodology rigorous, your conclusions irrefutable. Fair treatment produces better outcomes, economically, socially, morally. Cecilia felt hope surge. Then you'll support it publicly? More than that, I'm going to implement it across all royal holdings, every palace, every estate, every property under crown management. Charlotte's voice was firm. And I'm going to require detailed accounting of the results, which will be published alongside yours. Let's see the conservative lords argue against royal endorsement backed by their own beloved numbers. Adrian leaned forward. Your Highness, with respect, this will create powerful enemies. Lords who've built fortunes on exploitation won't accept this quietly. I know. That's why I'm doing it. Charlotte's expression hardened. I've watched the crown remain neutral on issues that demanded moral clarity. I've watched people suffer because speaking up was politically inconvenient. I'm done with that. If my position means anything, it should mean using it for something that matters." She stood, extending her hand to Cecilia. "You've shown remarkable courage, Your Grace. The least I can do is match it." They left Kensington Palace in a daze. Royal support changed everything. It provided legitimacy no amount of parliamentary votes could match. "We've won," Cecilia whispered in the carriage. "Haven't we? With Charlotte's backing, Ashford can't win publicly," Adrian corrected. "But men like him don't stop. They just change tactics." He was right. The report published to massive attention. The Times ran excerpts across 4 editions. Reform societies distributed copies throughout England. Workers' groups held public readings in taverns and meeting halls, and Princess Charlotte's announcement of crown-wide implementation appeared in every major newspaper. The response was seismic. Progressive lords rushed to implement similar reforms, not wanting to appear less enlightened than the crown. Moderate aristocrats, swayed by the economic data, began cautiously adopting selected practices. Even some conservative estates started making small changes, pressure from their own workers becoming impossible to ignore. But Ashford's faction didn't concede. They fought with every tool available: editorials attacking the report's methodology, pamphlets claiming the data was falsified, whisper campaigns suggesting Princess Charlotte had been manipulated by radical influences. The conflict came to a head at the season's final ball, the grand event that closed London's social calendar. Everyone who mattered would be there, and both sides knew it would be the last major public confrontation before society dispersed to country estates for autumn. Cecilia dressed in deep crimson silk, armor for battle disguised as elegance. Adrian wore black formal wear that made him look like an avenging angel. They arrived together, and the ballroom fell silent as they were announced. The social battlefield was clearly divided. Progressive lords and reform supporters clustered on one side, conservative opponents on the other. The center ground, moderates and undecided, watched to see which faction would prevail. Lord Ashford stood at the heart of the conservative group, his expression venomous despite his forced smile. "Duchess Blackmore," he said as she and Adrian approached the receiving line. "How bold of you to attend. I'd have thought you'd be too busy destroying England's traditional values." "Only the values built on exploitation, Lord Ashford. The rest seem to be thriving." His smile turned sharp. "Clever words, but words don't change reality. Your little experiment will fail. It's economically unsustainable, socially disruptive, and morally misguided." "Strange. The numbers suggest otherwise." Cecilia met his glare without flinching. "But then, you've never been interested in facts that contradict your prejudices." "Careful, Your Grace. You've made powerful enemies. And powerful friends." Princess Charlotte's voice cut through the tension. She'd arrived unannounced, and the room collectively held its breath. "Lord Ashford, I've been reading your criticisms of the reform report. They're quite passionate, if utterly unsupported by evidence." Ashford's face reddened. "Your Highness, I meant no disrespect to the crown, just to truth, apparently." Charlotte moved to stand beside Cecilia, a deliberate public alignment. "I've implemented these reforms across royal holdings with excellent results. Are you suggesting the crown's estate managers are incompetent?" "Of course not, Your Highness." "Then explain how the same practices produce success in royal estates, but failure in yours. Either the methodology works, or my managers are lying. Which is it?" The trap was perfect. Ashford couldn't insult the crown, couldn't admit his criticisms were baseless, couldn't retreat without losing face. "The royal estates have unique advantages," he said finally, grasping at straws. "Resources that make fair treatment feasible. Common estates cannot afford such luxuries." "The data disagrees." Adrian stepped forward, his voice carrying through the silent ballroom. "We analyzed estates across every economic tier. The pattern holds regardless of size or wealth. Fair treatment produces better results. The only variable is whether owners are willing to sacrifice short-term exploitation for long-term prosperity." "You speak of sacrifice," Ashford shot back. "But you've never known want, never struggled. You preach reform from the comfort of inherited wealth." "And you preach exploitation from the same comfort," Cecilia said quietly. "The difference is we're trying to build something better. You're just protecting your ability to abuse others for profit." The words hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. Ashford's control finally snapped. You self-righteous... He stopped himself, visibly shaking with rage. You think you've won? You've done nothing but sow chaos. Workers demanding rights, servants questioning authority, the entire social order you depend on crumbling around you. When it collapses, you'll have no one to blame but yourselves. If the social order requires cruelty to survive, Cecilia said, her voice steady and clear, then it deserves to collapse. We'll build something better from the ruins. The ballroom erupted, half in outrage, half in approval, the veneer of civility finally shattering. But Cecilia barely heard it. She was watching Ashford's face as he realized he'd lost. Not the argument, but the larger war. Public opinion had shifted. Royal support had legitimized reform. The economic data had proven effectiveness. And his explosion of rage had revealed him as exactly what Cecilia had always claimed, a man more interested in power than progress. Lord Ashford stormed out, his faction trailing behind in disarray. The moderate lords who'd been watching finally moved toward Cecilia and Adrian, not away. Questions came in a flood. Requests for the report, inquiries about implementation. The tide had definitively turned. Later, as the ball continued, Cecilia and Adrian found themselves on the same terrace where they'd first spoken honestly months ago. We did it, she said, still processing. We actually changed things. You changed things. I just helped. He pulled her close. You took an arranged marriage to a cold stranger and transformed it into a partnership that remade society. That's not us. That's you. It was always us. I'd have failed without you. You'd have found another way. That's who you are. He kissed her forehead. Stubborn, brilliant, unstoppable. She laughed, feeling giddy with relief and exhaustion. What happens now? Now we go home. Back to the estate. We implement everything we've learned, we train others, we keep building. He paused. And we live. Together. Not as Duke and Duchess performing roles, but as partners who've earned each other. The thought of returning to the estate, once a prison, now a home, filled her with unexpected joy. They left London a week later, the season over, and their work there complete for now. The countryside welcomed them with autumn colors, and the estate came into view looking somehow different. Warmer, more alive. The staff lined up to welcome them home, but instead of the stiff formality of their wedding day, there were genuine smiles. Annie rushed forward to help with Cecilia's coat. Mary offered tea. Even Mrs. Holloway's severe expression had softened into something approaching approval. We heard about the ball, the housekeeper said. About you facing down Lord Ashford. The staff wanted you to know. We're proud to serve this household. Cecilia felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you, Mrs. Holloway, for everything. I know I made your life difficult. You made it interesting, Your Grace. And better. The changes you implemented. They've made this a house worth working in. She actually smiled. Even if you did give me heart failure several times in the process. That evening, Cecilia and Adrian walked the estate grounds as the sun set. They visited the servant quarters, now properly heated and spacious. The tenant cottages, repaired and maintained. The fields where workers earned fair wages and took pride in their labor. Look at it, Adrian said. This is what we built. Not just better numbers, but better lives. It's just one estate, one small corner of England. No, it's proof. Evidence that another way is possible. He turned to face her. And it's spreading. Every estate that implements these methods, every worker who's treated fairly, every servant who lives with dignity, they're all part of what you started. She leaned against him, watching their estate settle into evening. I couldn't have done this without you, without us. I know. That's what makes it real. He kissed her, gentle and sure. We're partners. In reform, in life, in everything. They returned to the house as night fell, and Cecilia realized something had fundamentally shifted. This wasn't the cold, silent prison she'd entered 18 months ago. It was home. A place built on mutual respect, earned trust, and the hard work of transforming obligation into love. That night, lying in bed with Adrian's arms around her, Cecilia thought about the woman she'd been on her wedding day. Frightened, angry, determined to survive. She'd survived. But more than that, she'd transformed survival into something greater. She'd built power from powerlessness, partnership from indifference, love from duty. What are you thinking? Adrian murmured against her hair. That I'm grateful. For what? For you. For this. For every difficult moment that brought us here. She turned to face him. I was sold into this marriage like property. I resented you for it, hated you sometimes. I know, I gave you plenty of reasons. But somewhere along the way, we became something neither of us expected. Real, equal, true. He traced her face with careful fingers. You terrify me, you know. Your courage, your conviction, your absolute refusal to accept anything less than what's right. You've changed me completely. Good. The man I married needed changing. Harsh but accurate. He smiled. What do we do next? More reforms? Another report? Take on the entire aristocracy? Next, we rest. We enjoy what we've built. We remember we're not just reformers. We're people who love each other. She kissed him. And then, when we're ready, we keep fighting, together. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Cecilia's life. They worked on the estate, refined their methods, trained other landowners who came seeking guidance. But they also lived, riding through autumn fields, reading together in the library, hosting dinners where conversation mattered more than status. Letters arrived regularly from across England, estates reporting successful reforms, workers expressing gratitude, aristocrats requesting advice. The movement they'd started continued spreading, taking on life beyond their direct involvement. Princess Charlotte's royal estate reports were published quarterly, providing ongoing proof that fair treatment worked. The Dowager Duchess established a school for estate managers, teaching Cecilia's methods to the next generation. Lord Pemberton wrote a book expanding on the economic theories underlying reform. The transformation wasn't universal or immediate. Conservative lords still resisted. Exploitation still existed. The fight was far from over. But the conversation had changed. Reform was no longer radical. It was increasingly normal. The burden of proof had shifted from those advocating fairness to those defending cruelty. 6 months after the ball, Adrian received a letter from Parliament. They were forming a commission on labor reform and wanted him to chair it, not to study whether reform was needed, but to determine how to implement it nationwide. They're asking me to do officially what you've been doing unofficially, he said, showing Cecilia the letter. Turn your methods into law. Will you accept? Only if you work with me. These are your ideas, your methods. I'm just the aristocrat who learned to listen. They accepted together, and the work began. Drafting legislation, building coalitions, navigating political obstacles. It was exhausting and frustrating and occasionally terrifying. But it mattered, and they were doing it together. 2 years after their wedding, Parliament passed the Estate Workers' Protection Act, the first comprehensive labor legislation in English history. It didn't implement everything Cecilia had advocated for, but it established minimums, maximum working hours, minimum wages, basic safety requirements, protections against arbitrary dismissal. It wasn't revolutionary. It was evolutionary, gradual change built on proven success. And it had Cecilia's fingerprints all over it. The night the act passed, they celebrated quietly at the estate. No grand ball, no public spectacle. Just them. The household staff they'd transformed from servants into partners, and the knowledge that they'd fundamentally changed their world. To Cecilia, Annie said, raising a glass during the servants' celebration below stairs. Who saw us as people when no one else did. To the Duke, Mary added, who listened when his wife showed him the truth. To all of us, Mrs. Holloway said, her voice thick with emotion, for proving that things can change when people care enough to fight. Upstairs, Adrian and Cecilia stood in the conservatory, the room where old Griffiths had once told her about the passion flowers that needed exactly the right care to bloom. He was right, she said, touching the purple flowers that had survived and thrived. Beautiful things are worth the trouble, even when they're difficult. Especially when they're difficult. Adrian pulled her close. We were both difficult, broken in our own ways, but we did the work. We did. She looked up at him. I'm not the woman you married. Thank everything for that. That woman was surviving. You're living. We're living, together. He kissed her as the conservatory filled with the scent of jasmine and the promise of things that grow when given the right conditions. Outside, England continued its slow transformation. Inside, 2 people who'd started as strangers held each other in the warm dark, having built something neither could have created alone. Love wasn't what had saved them. Partnership was. Respect. Shared purpose. The hard, unglamorous work of becoming allies in a world that wanted them separate. But somewhere in that work, love had grown anyway. Not the passionate fairy tale she'd once imagined, but something stronger. Something earned. And that, Cecilia thought as she rested her head against Adrian's chest, was worth every moment of the fight. Years later, when students of history asked her about those turbulent days, Cecilia would smile and say it was complicated, that social change was never clean or simple, that they'd made mistakes, hurt people unintentionally, succeeded partly through luck. But when pressed about her marriage, how an arranged union became a partnership that remade society, her answer was simpler. We saw each other, she'd say, really saw each other, past all the roles and expectations and fear. And once we saw the truth, we couldn't unsee it, not about each other and not about the world around us. So love saved you? They'd ask. No, we saved ourselves. Love was just what we built along the way. And in the estate that had once been her prison, surrounded by the lives they'd helped transform, Cecilia Blackmore, once a frightened girl sold to solve her father's debts, now a woman who'd reshaped her society, lived not happily ever after, but fully ever after. Because happiness was too small a word for what they'd created. They'd built something bigger, a life that mattered, in a world they'd helped change, with a partner who'd become her equal in every way that counted. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.